Hey there, tonight we're uncovering what pastoral life was like in ancient Mongolia. What you're about to discover might just redefine your idea of a nomadic lifestyle, complete with yak milk tea and the harsh beauty of the steppes. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now get comfortable, perhaps dim the lights, or find that perfect pillow position, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You awaken to the sound of sheep bleating and the gentle rustle of felt walls in your ger, a cozy, portable home that's been your family's shelter for, well, countless generations. You're living in ancient Mongolia, where the steppe stretches endlessly, and your life revolves around the whims of the weather and the needs of your livestock. It's a world where the early bird doesn't just get the worm, it gets to avoid the wrath of a hungry wolf. Now, those felt walls, they're made from layers of sheep wool, tightly pressed and sewn together. Not just any old wool tapestry, but the pinnacle of nomadic engineering. Why felt? It insulates against the bitter cold that sweeps through the steppe like an unwelcome houseguest. Plus, it's durable and importantly portable. We're talking about a time when your home needed to move as fast as your herds, because the grass is always greener on the other side. Literally. Your first task of the day, milking the livestock. Cows, yaks, goats, they're the lifeline of your family. You might not have a Starbucks on the corner, but you've got fresh milk, and let's be honest, there's something rewarding about earning your breakfast. The process is a bit of a circus act, especially with a stubborn goat, but it's a skill honed over years. And you're not just milking for fun. This is your sustenance, your trade, your everything. In a place where money doesn't grow on trees, because, well, trees are kind of rare, livestock is your currency. After that, it's time for breakfast. Forget avocado toast or acai bowls. Try some cork carb, a stew made with mutton, cooked over hot stones. You might have to deal with the occasional crunchy bit of bone, but hey, that's what you get in an age before dental insurance. Breakfast here is less about Instagrammable aesthetics and more about fuel for a day of hard work. Speaking of fuel, you're not exactly chopping wood for your fires. Instead, you're using sheep dung. Yes, you heard that right. Dung. Before you gag, know that it burns surprisingly well and is one of the few reliable resources in this treeless expanse. Besides, it's not like you're hauling coal up a mountain. You're just making do with what the land gives you. Your ancestors figured out this trick centuries ago, turning what others might see as waste into warmth. Talk about recycling. The placement of your ger isn't random either. It's an art form, a strategic decision based on the wind's direction and the terrain's lay. You're not just plopping down anywhere. You've got to think like a military general. After all, a well-placed ger can mean the difference between a peaceful sleep and being woken up by a howling gale trying to uproot your home. Now, let's talk social structure. In your family, roles are as clearly defined as the horizon. Gender and age dictate the daily grind. Men typically handle the herding and hunting, while women manage the home and children. It sounds rigid, and it is, but it's also practical given the harsh environment. Everyone's got a job, and if you shirk your duties, well, the family doesn't eat. Survival here is a team sport, not a solo endeavor. Children, meanwhile, are the apprentices of this nomadic life. From a young age, they're learning the ropes, or rather, the lassos. By the time they're teenagers, they're expected to contribute, whether it's tending to the goats or gathering dung for the fire. There's no room for slackers when winter's breath is never too far away. This society might sound like a strict, unyielding place, but there's a beauty in its simplicity. Every action, every decision is rooted in survival and community. You might not have access to modern conveniences, but what you do have is a profound connection to the land and each other. And sure, that connection might sometimes involve stepping in sheep dung, but such is life on the Mongolian steppe. There's a quiet dignity in this existence, even if it means waking up at the crack of dawn to a chorus of bleats and the smell of fresh milk. As the sun climbs higher in this vast, unending canvas of sky and steppe, you're reminded that the real MVPs of Mongolian life are the animals. They're not just part of the landscape, they are the landscape. Living, breathing stock markets on 4 legs. Your family's future isn't written in the stars. It's penned in the tracks of hooves across the plains. Let's dive into why these animals aren't just your average barnyard buddies, but but the economic backbone of your existence here. First up, the horse. Forget your sports car. This is your status symbol, your war machine, and your daily commute all in one. Each Mongolian family needed at least 5 horses per person to really hit their stride. That's not because you're planning some epic steeplet chase, but because horses here are the ultimate multitaskers. They're your transportation, your cavalry, and your social standing. The more horses you have, the more you're seen as a big shot on the steppe. Oh, and these aren't just any nags. They're the Ferrari of the ancient world, bred for endurance and speed. Remember, in a place where the horizon is as distant as your next meal, you need a ride that can go the distance. But horses aren't just for show. They're also your beverage suppliers. Enter Erag, the fermented mare's milk that packs a punch stronger than a Mongol archer's bow. Erag is the drink of choice, the social lubricant, and a handy way to preserve milk in a world without refrigeration. You see, fermenting milk into Erag solves a problem. How to keep dairy in a place where ice isn't exactly abundant. Sure, the idea of boozy milk might not sound like it's going to make the menu at your local craft cocktail bar, but in this world, it's practically liquid gold. Next in line are the yaks. With their shaggy coats and lumbering gait, yaks are the unsung heroes of the steppe. They're your beasts of burden, your wool suppliers, and your source of meat. A family needed about 20 yaks to really maintain a solid economy. Why so many? Well, their wool is spun into ropes, their milk is richer than cream, and their meat is a staple when the weather turns colder than a landlord's heart. Yaks are the Swiss Army knife of livestock, adaptable to the brutal cold and rugged terrain. If horses are your express train, yaks are the freight carriers, slowly but surely plodding along with everything you need. And what about camels? In the go-by regions, these two-humped wonders are as essential as a good Wi-Fi signal in the modern age. Camels are your movers and shakers, carrying heavy loads over impossible distances without breaking a sweat. In a land where water is scarcer than a politician's apology, camels are the ultimate survivors. Each family aims to have a few camels on hand for those long treks across the desert. They're not just transport, they're a lifeline. Sheep, meanwhile, are the bread and butter of the Mongolian economy, or rather, the mutton and wool. A family typically needed anywhere from 100 to 200 sheep to keep the household ticking over. Why so many? Well, these fluffy critters are the source of your clothing, your food, and even your housing material. Their wool turns into felt, their meat into sustenance, and their dung into fuel. Talk about multi-use. In a world where every resource counts, sheep are your utility players, the ones who keep the lights on and the stove burning. Now, if you think herding these creatures is a walk in the park, think again. It's more like a tactical operation. You're constantly moving, adapting to the whims of the weather and the needs of the land. The Mongols understood something that modern economists sometimes forget. Diversification is key. By relying on a variety of animals, they ensured that if one resource dried up, others could pick up the slack. It's all about balance and making sure your portfolio, pasture, is as varied as possible. Consider this. When Genghis Khan wasn't busy building empires, he was relying on these very animals to fuel his conquests. His army was like a mobile city, with each soldier managing their own herd. This meant that wherever they went, they could sustain themselves without a supply line. The animals were the silent partners in his grand scheme, the unsung heroes of his military might. But let's not romanticize it too much. Life on the steppe is a constant negotiation with nature. The animals you rely on can be as temperamental as the weather. A sudden storm or a shift in the climate can mean the difference between a thriving herd and a decimated one. It's a high-stakes game with no guarantees, where the only constant is change and the relentless drive to adapt. So, as you watch the sun set over the horizon, casting long shadows across your grazing herds, remember that these animals are more than mere beasts of burden. They are the heart and soul of a way of life that has endured for centuries, a testament to the resilience and ingenuity of the Mongolian people. And as you sip your erag, you might just raise a toast to these noble creatures. Here's to the horses, yaks, camels, and sheep, the true kings of the steppe. And as the last drop of erag slides down your throat, you're reminded that while animals may rule the steppe, it's the human drama that truly stirs the pot. By midday, the social stage is set for a political spectacle that could rival your favorite reality TV drama. Welcome to the Kuriltai, the ancient Mongolian version of a board meeting, where the stakes are as high as the mountain passes. Here, tribal alliances and rivalries are laid bare, and the political landscape is as volatile as a pot of simmering cork. Now, let's talk about these Kuriltais. Picture this: a massive gathering of tribal leaders, warriors, and anyone with a stake in the game, all huddled together under the endless blue sky. It's like a medieval TED talk, but with more horses and fewer PowerPoint presentations. These meetings were critical, deciding everything from war and peace to succession plans and marriage alliances. Think of them as a cross between a United Nations summit and a family reunion, but with more mustaches and less small talk. Leadership in this world wasn't just handed over like a family heirloom. It was earned through a combination of charisma, military prowess, and yes, a fair amount of backstabbing. The Kuriltai was where leaders were chosen and decisions were made that could unite or utterly divide tribes. It wasn't just about who shouted the loudest, though that helped. It was about who could convince the most people that they had the best vision for the future. In this arena, words were weapons, and alliances were forged and broken faster than you can say political intrigue. Enter Genghis Khan, the ultimate showstopper of the steppe. Before he became the name that launched 1,000 documentaries, young Temujin faced a world where backstabbing wasn't a metaphor, but a literal occupational hazard. Born in 1162, he rose through the ranks not by birthright, but by sheer determination and a talent for uniting the fractious tribes of Mongolia. Under his leadership, the Mongol Empire grew like a viral meme, spreading from the Pacific Ocean to Eastern Europe. Genghis's rise to power wasn't just about charisma. It was about understanding the intricate web of tribal loyalties and playing the long game. He turned the Kuriltai from a chaotic assembly into a finely tuned instrument of governance and strategy. His genius lay in recognizing that a unified Mongolia was more powerful than its individual parts. By 1206, he had enough support to be declared the Great Khan in a Kuriltai that changed the course of history. This unification wasn't just a nifty trick. It was a game-changer for a pastoral society. Suddenly, the tribal divisions that had once dictated who grazed where and who raided whom were less important than the collective might of the Mongolian horde. This newfound unity allowed for unprecedented expansion and the creation of an empire that would make even the Romans do a double take. The Mongols became a force that could project power far beyond their borders, all thanks to the political savvy honed in these gatherings. But let's not gloss over the less glamorous aspects of this political landscape, because alongside the grand visions and sweeping military campaigns, there were harsh realities. Theft and betrayal were met with brutal consequences. The steppe wasn't a place for second chances. It was about survival of the fittest, and sometimes that meant enforcing loyalty with an iron fist. The laws were clear. Steal a horse, and you might find yourself missing a hand, or worse. These punishments weren't just about deterrence. They were about maintaining the fragile order that kept this society from descending into chaos. Yet, for all its savagery, the Mongolian legal system had its own rough-hewn logic. In a world where resources were precious and trust was currency, harsh penalties ensured that everyone played by the rules or paid the price. It was a system designed to keep the peace in a land where peace was often just a lull between storms. And so, as the Kuriltai draws to a close and the sun dips lower in the sky, you're left with a sense of the precarious balance that defined ancient Mongolia. It was a world where the line between order and chaos was as thin as the horizon, where leaders like Genghis Khan could rise from obscurity to reshape empires, and where the harsh realities of life were tempered by the enduring spirit of those who called the steppe home. As you pack up your ger and prepare to move with the herds, remember that while the Kuriltai might have been the stage for grand political theatre, it was also a testament to the resilience and adaptability of the Mongolian people. In this vast and unforgiving land, they found a way to not only survive, but to thrive, and in doing so, they left a legacy that would echo through history. Stay tuned, because the story of ancient Mongolia is far from over. There are more tales to tell, more myths to debunk, and more lessons to learn from a people who dared to dream big and live even bigger. As the Kuriltai fades into the rearview mirror of your mind, the afternoon sun casts a golden hue over the steppe, signaling a shift from political intrigue to cultural immersion. Now, let's dive into what made Mongolian life truly sing, literally and figuratively. We're talking about music, fashion, and the everyday art that turns survival into a celebration. First up, the Morincoa, or horsehead fiddle. This isn't just a musical instrument, it's the soul of the steppe embodied in wood and string. With its 2 strings and a carved horse's head adorning the neck, the Morincoa is as much a cultural icon as it is a source of entertainment. Its sounds are said to mimic the gentle thundering of hooves across the plains, a haunting melody that echoes the Mongolian connection to their equine companions. In fact, the UNESCO recognizes the Morincoa as a masterpiece of the oral and intangible heritage of humanity. Talk about a high honor for something that fits snugly in your lap. Imagine sitting by the fire, the sky a blanket of stars, while a skilled player draws a bow across the strings, conjuring tales of valor and love. These are not your average campfire songs. They're epic sagas that could give Homer a run for his money. And it's not just for show. Music here serves a purpose, reinforcing social bonds, passing down stories, and even soothing the animals. Yes, even the horses get a concert. Now that's what I call a captive audience. But wait, there's more to Mongolian culture than a fiddle and a campfire. Enter the deal, the traditional garment that wraps you in history and practicality. Think of it as the Mongolian answer to the trench coat, but with way more flair. Made from silk, cotton, or wool, the deal is designed to ward off the biting cold while allowing for freedom of movement. Its vibrant colors and intricate patterns are a feast for the eyes, each stitch telling a story of heritage and identity. The deal isn't just about looking good, it's about surviving in style. The long sleeves can be tied back for work or let loose for warmth, and the wide sash at the waist doubles as a handy place to tuck your tools, or, let's be honest, your snacks. This garment is an all-season wonder, as capable in the sweltering summer as it is in the winter's chill. And in a world where fashion is dictated by necessity, the deal is the ultimate multitasker. But let's not get too swept away by the romance of it all. The Mongol warrior, often romanticized as a lone rider galloping into the sunset, is more reality than fantasy. Sure, they were feared conquerors, but their lives weren't just about swords and glory. Picture a soldier's gear: a composite bow that could shoot an arrow 500 meters, a leather helmet, and a silk undershirt to keep a blade from piercing too deep. Practical, not glamorous, and definitely not lightweight. These warriors lived on horseback, eating, sleeping, and fighting from the saddle. Their diet wasn't exactly Michelin-starred, more like meat-heavy and dairy-rich, with the occasional dried curd for variety. And while the iconic image of the Mongol warrior is often polished to a shine, the truth is they were more about grit than glitz. Traveling light, they carried only the essentials: weapons, a change of clothes, and perhaps a small tent. This wasn't about living large. It was about moving fast and staying alive. Primary sources give us a window into this world, like the accounts of Marco Polo, who marveled at their endurance and adaptability. He described them as people of iron, which is a nice way of saying they were tougher than old boots. But not everyone was a fan. Rashid al-Din, a 13th century Persian historian, criticized them for their coarse and savage ways, a reminder that one person's hero is another's headache. Still, the Mongols weren't just about warfare. Their culture was a rich tapestry woven with threads of art, music, and storytelling. Take the epic of Janga, a legendary tale of a hero's adventures, which was recited by bards and passed down through generations. This wasn't just entertainment. It was a way to preserve history and instill values. In a society where written records were scarce, oral tradition was the glue that held the past and present together. And let's not forget the role of women in this cultural mosaic. While men were off on campaigns, women managed the domestic sphere with an iron grip and a keen mind. They were the keepers of the hearth and the heart, responsible for everything from making clothes to handling finances. In fact, some women even took part in military campaigns, proving that girl power is not a modern invention. So, as you sit there in your deal, tapping your foot to the rhythm of the Morincoa, you get a sense of the vibrant life that thrived on the steppe. It's a world where music and stories are as vital as food and water, where fashion serves function, and where the line between myth and reality blurs like the horizon at dusk. But let's not pack up our jers just yet. With the sun beginning to set, there's still more of ancient Mongolia to explore. We've only just scratched the surface of this fascinating world, where the past is as alive as the present. So, stay tuned, because the story is far from over, and there's plenty more to uncover before the final curtain falls, as the last rays of sun stretch across the endless steppe, painting a scene straight out of a Pinterest board. You're nudged to ponder the myths and truths of Mongolian pastoral life. Spoiler alert, it's not all epic horse battles and yurt parties. The Mongol Empire is often romanticized as the ultimate rags-to-riches story of a nomadic tribe conquering half the known world. But beneath this cinematic veneer lies a gritty reality that's less about world domination and more about sheer survival. Sure, the Mongols were formidable conquerors, but they were also environmental pragmatists. Let's talk numbers. The pastoral lifestyle wasn't just a whim, it was a necessity. Mongolia's climate is about as forgiving as a tax audit, with extreme temperatures swinging from -30 degrees C in winter to 40 degrees C in summer. In this harsh environment, agriculture was about as viable as growing pineapples in Antarctica. So what did they do? They turned to herding, because if you can't beat the land, you join it. The Mongols practiced what modern environmentalists might call sustainable living before it was cool. They understood the delicate balance of their ecosystem, moving with the seasons to prevent overgrazing. Their migratory patterns were like a well-choreographed ballet, dictated by the availability of water and pasture. This wasn't just smart, it was life-or-death savvy. An average Mongolian family needed around 50 to 100 animals to sustain themselves, a number carefully calculated to feed and clothe them without stressing the land. But let's not get carried away with the greenery. The Mongols' lifestyle, while sustainable in their time, did leave its mark. The constant movement of herds across the steppe meant that the landscape was in a constant state of flux. And while the Mongols were experts at managing their herds, they couldn't predict the future. Modern Mongolia faces desertification issues, partly due to overgrazing, a reminder that even the best-laid plans can have unintended consequences. Now, let's bust some myths about the Mongol Empire itself. It wasn't all glittering achievements and cultural renaissance. The empire's rapid expansion was as much about brutal efficiency as it was about genius strategy. Genghis Khan's forces were ruthless, employing psychological warfare that would make any modern general take notes. They spread fear as a tool of conquest, ensuring their reputation preceded them. Cities often surrendered without a fight, preferring to open their gates rather than face the Mongol onslaught. Not exactly the stuff of fairy tales. Yet, for all their fearsome reputation, the Mongols were surprisingly progressive when it came to governance. They implemented a meritocracy, a concept that wouldn't catch on in Europe for centuries. Positions of power were earned, not inherited, and religious freedom was a cornerstone of their rule. This open-mindedness helped them manage a vast empire composed of diverse cultures and religions. It wasn't all scorched earth and pillaging. It was about building a new world order where different peoples could coexist under the Mongol banner. Fast forward to today, and you'll find the echoes of this storied past in modern Mongolia. The country, now a democracy, still reveres its nomadic traditions. About 30% of the population continues to live as herders, moving with the seasons just as their ancestors did. And while Ulaanbaatar has its fair share of skyscrapers and Wi-Fi hotspots, the spirit of the steppe is never far away. Festivals like Nardam celebrate traditional sports like wrestling, archery, and horse racing, keeping the cultural flame alive. Let's not forget the influence of the Mongols on the world stage. Their empire, at its height, was a conduit for trade and ideas between East and West. The Silk Road flourished under their watch, and innovations like gunpowder and paper money spread far and wide. The Mongols didn't just conquer, they connected, creating pathways that would shape the future of global commerce and culture. So, as night falls and you sit by the flickering light of the dung-fueled fire, it's clear that Mongolian pastoral life was a tapestry of resilience, adaptation, and innovation. It was a world where survival was both an art and a science, where the legends of warriors and khans were grounded by the everyday realities of herding and homemaking. This was a society that thrived not just by the sword, but by the savvy use of its natural resources and human ingenuity. In the end, the Mongol legacy is a testament to the enduring power of adaptability. It's a reminder that history is not just a series of grand conquests, but a story of people who lived, loved, and labored under the vast sky of the steppe. And perhaps, as you drift off to sleep. You'll carry a piece of that history with you, a legacy of resilience that continues to shape the world today. In a world where pyramids were the skyscrapers and cats were the ultimate influencers, the rise of the pharaohs was less about epic battles and more about savvy matchmaking and early bureaucracy. Around 3100 BCE, Egypt wasn't just a land of sand and sunburn. It was the hotbed of political innovation. You see, the story of the pharaohs begins not with a clashing of swords, but with a clinking of goblets, what were likely the most strategically important wedding receptions of the ancient world. Enter King Narmer, the ancient Egyptian equivalent of a political rock star, strutting through history like he owned the Nile. Narmer is credited with unifying Upper and Lower Egypt, but let's not get carried away with visions of him heroically galloping on a chariot across the desert. The reality was more akin to a carefully balanced merger than a hostile takeover. It's believed the unification was achieved through a combination of strategic marriages and shrewd diplomacy, the kind of political maneuvering that would make even the most seasoned corporate negotiator sit up and take notes. Narmer's name is etched in history, literally, on the Narmer palette, a ceremonial artifact that's like the ancient world's LinkedIn profile. The palette shows Narmer wearing both the white crown of Upper Egypt and the red crown of Lower Egypt, a visual power play that screamed, "I'm the CEO of Egypt now." But don't be fooled by the grandiosity. Uniting a country wasn't just about wearing fancy headgear. It involved setting up the first known system of centralized governance in human history, a feat that was less glamorous and more akin to herding cats, quite literally, given the Egyptians' feline friends. The establishment of this centralized state meant that the pharaohs had to invent bureaucracy before it was cool. Imagine a pre-Google Sheets world where record-keeping involved chiseling on stone tablets. Talk about a literal hard copy. Taxation systems were put in place to fund the state. Farmers had to pay taxes in the form of grain, and since the Nile had a knack for flooding, the pharaohs could claim the harvest as their divine right. It was a system that worked out quite nicely for the elite, who probably didn't spend much time sweating under the Egyptian sun. And let's not forget the divine aspect. Pharaohs were considered gods on earth, a handy title when you're trying to keep the populace in line. But if you think being considered a deity was all golden chariots and eternal youth, think again. The pharaohs bore the weight of divine expectations, basically a cosmic customer service role where failure wasn't an option. If the Nile didn't flood as expected, it wasn't just a bad year for crops. It was a sign that the gods were displeased, and guess who the people blamed? The truth is, pharaohs were caught in an eternal balancing act between their earthly duties and celestial expectations. Behind the grandeur of their colossal monuments was a nation that ran on the efforts of countless scribes, administrators, and laborers, each contributing to the grand illusion of divine rulership. It was a well-oiled machine that relied on a network of officials who kept the wheels of the state turning. These early bureaucrats were the unsung heroes of the ancient world, or villains, depending on how you feel about taxes. In building this grand civilization, the pharaohs didn't just erect temples and pyramids. They laid the foundations of a complex society that revolved around their divine image. The bureaucracy ensured that the pharaoh's presence was felt from the bustling streets of Memphis to the far reaches of Thebes. They may have been gods in name, but they were human in their need for control and stability. And so, while the romantic tales of pharaohs might conjure images of epic conquests and divine decrees, the reality was a bit more mundane. It was a world where strategic marriages and bureaucratic innovation held more power than any sword. The rise of the pharaohs was a story of balancing divine image with political acumen, a tale of leaders who managed to keep their heads while donning crowns, quite literally. And speaking of balancing acts, let's leap into the architectural fever dream that is pyramid building, a pursuit so grand and so absurd it would make even the most ambitious real estate developers break into a cold sweat. Welcome to the Old Kingdom, where if you were a pharaoh, apparently dying with modesty, just wasn't an option. Forget about a tasteful tombstone. These guys were all about the monumental bling of the afterlife. The Great Pyramid of Giza, constructed for Pharaoh Khufu around 2580-2560 BCE, is the towering poster child of this era. We're talking about a structure that originally stood at a jaw-dropping 146 meters, or 481 feet for those on the imperial system, all built without the aid of cranes, bulldozers, or modern engineering degrees. Now, here's the kicker. This marvel of ancient engineering was made from approximately 3 million limestone blocks, each weighing in at about 5 tons on average. So, if you think your morning commute is tough, imagine hauling one of these bad boys across the desert. Now, let's address the elephant, or rather, the slave in the room. For years, the romantic image of slaves toiling under the unforgiving sun, whipped into submission by Pharaoh's overseers, has dominated popular culture. But archaeological evidence paints a different picture, one that's far more nuanced and decidedly less cinematic. Excavations at Giza have uncovered workers' cemeteries and living quarters, revealing that these laborers were likely well-fed hired hands, not enslaved captives. They dined on bread and beef, a diet that would make even a modern nutritionist nod in approval. This suggests a workforce motivated not by fear, but perhaps by the promise of a better life, or at least a reliable meal ticket. So why, you ask, did Khufu decide to dedicate such a colossal amount of resources and manpower to his tomb? The simple answer: legacy. In a society where the afterlife was taken more seriously than life itself, the size of your pyramid directly correlated with your divine status. It was the ultimate post-mortem flex, a statement piece that screamed, "I'm here forever." But let's not overlook the economic implications. Building these massive structures was like an ancient version of the New Deal, creating jobs and keeping the economy humming. The pharaohs weren't just securing their spot in the afterlife. They were stabilizing the earthly realm too. Talk about killing 2 birds with 1 stone, or in this case, 2 million stones. Then there's the question of logistics. How on earth did they manage to transport and assemble those massive blocks? Theories abound, from rolling the stones on logs to dragging them over wet sand, a technique that would make any science teacher's eyes light up. And once they reached the construction site, ramps, pulleys, and sheer manpower did the rest. It's a testament to human ingenuity and a stark reminder that when people say they don't build them like they used to, they really mean it. But let's not get too swept up in the grandeur. The truth is, pyramid building also showcases the absurdities of centralized power. The resources poured into these colossal tombs were immense, often draining the state coffers. Imagine being a taxpayer, knowing your hard-earned grain was funding not an educational initiative, but a giant limestone triangle. It's the kind of fiscal policy that would make modern economists cringe. Yet, it highlights the pharaoh's ability to rally a nation around a common goal, albeit one that revolved around their own immortality. And so, while the pyramids stand as a testament to ancient Egypt's architectural prowess, they also serve as a monument to the complex interplay of politics, economy, and religion. They remind us that behind every grand facade is a story of human toil and ambition, of societies striving to leave their mark on history. These stone giants are more than just tourist attractions. They're the legacy of a civilization that dared to dream big, sometimes to the point of folly. In the end, the pyramids aren't just about the pharaohs who commissioned them. They're about the thousands of workers who built them, the administrators who organized the logistics, and the society that supported such an audacious endeavor. As we stand in their shadow today, we're not just looking at ancient Egypt's past. We're gazing at a mirror reflecting the timeless human quest for greatness, however misguided it might sometimes be. And as we prepare to delve deeper into the world of the pharaohs, remember, history is never just about the leaders at the top. It's about the people who made, questioned, and ultimately lived it. But as the shadow of the pyramids lengthens over the sands of time, our story shifts to the Middle Kingdom, the era that's like Egypt's middle child, often overlooked, but crucial for the family's overall success. The Middle Kingdom, spanning from about 2050 to 1710 BCE, wasn't about building monuments to immortality. It was about building a nation that actually worked. If the Old Kingdom was the rock star phase of Egypt's history, the Middle Kingdom was when they put on glasses, got a real job, and worried about the economy. This period is often dubbed the reunification, as it followed a tumultuous time known as the First Intermediate Period. Picture Egypt not as a unified empire, but as a patchwork quilt of local rulers all claiming to be the big cheese. It was chaos, with power as fragmented as a torn papyrus scroll. Enter Mentuhotep Roman II, the pharaoh who decided enough was enough and reunited Egypt around 2050 BCE. His approach wasn't just about flexing military muscle. It was about administration and infrastructure. Essentially, he was the kind of leader who'd excel at Sim City. So what did the Middle Kingdom do differently? For starters, they took a good hard look at agriculture. The Nile, Egypt's lifeline, was more than just a scenic backdrop for epic battles and love stories. It was the country's breadbasket, quite literally. The Middle Kingdom rulers understood this and embarked on ambitious projects to control the river's floodwaters, building canals, reservoirs, and dikes. It was a bit like ancient Egyptian irrigation on steroids. By taming the Nile, they turned potential disaster into a guaranteed harvest, ensuring that the granaries were full and bellies weren't empty. But the Nile's generosity didn't just stop at food. It was the superhighway of ancient Egypt, and the Middle Kingdom knew how to use it. They expanded trade routes, sending their goods up and down the river and beyond. Trade wasn't just about bling and baubles. It was a cornerstone of stability. By trading gold, papyrus, and linen, they secured alliances and brought wealth into the kingdom, filling the coffers without having to resort to pillaging and plundering. It was economics 101. Diversify your portfolio and watch the prosperity roll in. And speaking of economics, let's talk about taxes. In the Middle Kingdom, they perfected the art of getting citizens to cough up their dues. Tax collectors, or scribes, roamed the land like ancient IRS agents, ensuring that the pharaoh's coffers were never bare. It was a system that was both efficient and, let's be honest, a little bit terrifying for the average farmer. But hey, at least they weren't chiseling their tax returns into stone tablets anymore. Papyrus had finally made paperwork slightly less soul-crushing. Now, if you're imagining the pharaohs of this era lounging around in opulent palaces, think again. The Middle Kingdom pharaohs understood that to keep a nation running smoothly, you had to be more than a distant deity. They adopted a new image, that of a shepherd. Yes, you heard that right. Pharaohs as shepherds. It was a cunning PR move, positioning themselves as caretakers rather than untouchable guards. This wasn't just about being warm and fuzzy. It was political pragmatism at its finest. By presenting themselves as guardians of the people, they maintained loyalty and minimized uprisings. After all, it's harder to revolt against a ruler who's seen as your protector rather than your oppressor. Fortifying borders was also high on the to-do list. The Middle Kingdom pharaohs weren't looking for expansionist glory. They were all about keeping what they had safe and sound. They established military outposts and built massive fortresses, especially along the borders of Nubia to the south. This wasn't just about keeping out invaders. It was about controlling trade routes and resources. It was like building a fence around the backyard of your kingdom to keep out unwanted guests while ensuring that all the goodies stayed in. One of the most intriguing aspects of the Middle Kingdom was its literature. This era produced some of Egypt's most enduring works, tales that explored themes of morality, loyalty, and the human condition. Stories like The Tale of the Shipwrecked Sailor and The Story of Sinu were the ancient equivalents of bestsellers, offering insights into the minds and hearts of the people. These texts, written in beautiful hieratic script, reveal a society that valued wisdom and narrative almost as much as grain and gold. But let's not romanticize the Middle Kingdom too much. Despite its achievements, this was a time of intense labor and rigid social hierarchy. The pharaohs may have donned the guise of shepherds, but there were still plenty of sheep to herd. Life for the average Egyptian wasn't exactly a picnic by the Nile. The state demanded not only taxes, but also labor, particularly for those massive fortresses and irrigation projects. And while the Nile's bounty could stave off famine, it couldn't prevent disease or death, which were constant companions in the ancient world. Yet, for all its challenges, the Middle Kingdom was a time of relative peace and stability, a golden age of governance that laid the groundwork for future advancements. As we look back, it's clear that the Middle Kingdom pharaohs understood a fundamental truth. Power isn't just about divine right or military might. It's about the art of governance, the ability to manage not just a kingdom, but the hearts and minds of its people. So as we prepare to continue our journey into the world of the pharaohs, remember that history is never just a series of grand events. It's a tapestry woven from the threads of countless lives, each contributing to the story of a civilization that dared to dream big and sometimes dream wisely. The Middle Kingdom, with its focus on practical governance and economic stability, reminds us that the legacy of the Pharaohs wasn't just built on stone and sand. It was etched into the very fabric of society. And as we transition from the pragmatic Middle Kingdom to the glitzy New Kingdom, brace yourselves for an era where Egypt didn't just survive. It thrived with all the flair of a blockbuster sequel. The New Kingdom, spanning approximately from 1550 to 1070 BCE, is often hailed as Egypt's Golden Age, a period where pharaohs strutted the international stage with all the swagger of rock stars on a world tour. But before you get swept up in the glamorous tales of conquest and diplomacy, let's peel back the gilded veneer to uncover the gritty realities lurking beneath. The New Kingdom was born out of turmoil, emerging from the Second Intermediate Period, a time when foreign rulers, the Hyksos, had the audacity to set up camp in the Nile Delta. Picture a medieval house party gone wrong, with uninvited guests overstaying their welcome. In response, the Egyptians, led by the Theban princes, decided that enough was enough. They booted out the Hyksos and launched the 18th dynasty, setting the stage for an Egyptian renaissance that would put any post-war economic boom to shame. And what better way to kick off a golden age than with a little bit of expansionism, right? Under the leadership of pharaohs like Thutmose III, often dubbed the Napoleon of Egypt. Egypt extended its borders from the Euphrates in the north to Nubia in the south. Thutmose III was a bit of a military prodigy, conducting at least 17 campaigns in 20 years. His secret sauce, a combination of chariots, foot soldiers, and some serious strategic prowess. But let's not romanticize it too much. These campaigns were less about noble conquest and more about securing wealth and resources. It was empire building 101. Grab land, extract resources, repeat. But expansion wasn't just about flexing military muscle. Enter Amenhotep III, the pharaoh who turned diplomacy into an art form. He was the maestro of international relations, using marriage alliances to bind Egypt's neighbors closer than a family reunion. Picture him as the ancient world's ultimate matchmaker, with his extensive harem serving as the LinkedIn of the ancient diplomatic world. Through a web of letters and gifts, Amenhotep maintained peace and prosperity, ensuring Egypt's coffers were as full as their granaries. Yet, for all their achievements, the New Kingdom pharaohs were also masters of PR, with none more legendary than Ramses II or Ramses the Great. Because why settle for good when you can be great? Ramses II was the original influencer, commissioning more statues of himself than a modern-day celebrity has selfies. His most famous work, the temples of Abu Simbel, carved out of a mountainside to intimidate would-be invaders from Nubia. It's like leaving your house keys under the mat, but with a 20-meter-tall statue pointing the way. But Ramses' crowning moment wasn't just about statues. It was the Battle of Kadesh against the Hittites. Now, Ramses' account of Kadesh is the ancient equivalent of a heavily edited Instagram post. He portrayed it as a spectacular victory, but the reality was more of a stalemate. The Hittites had chariots too, and they weren't shy about using them. Ramses claimed divine intervention saved him, a classic move when your army's caught with its chariots in a rut. The battle ended with the world's first recorded peace treaty, a diplomatic coup that Ramses spun as a personal triumph, thereby reinforcing his image as the invincible pharaoh. And speaking of invincibility, it's time to burst that bubble. The romantic image of the all-powerful pharaoh was as much myth as reality. Maintaining an empire that stretched over 1,000 miles was no walk in the desert. The New Kingdom was a high-maintenance affair, requiring constant attention to keep the regions in check. It was an empire stretched as thin as mummy wrappings, with border skirmishes and internal revolts never too far away. Ramses' successors would find themselves dealing with increasingly frequent uprisings and a treasury that was starting to look like an empty tomb. Economically, the New Kingdom was a mix of booms and busts. The wealth from conquests and trade was impressive, but so were the expenses. Maintaining a standing army, building monumental temples, and keeping the Nile's irrigation systems in tip-top shape was the ancient equivalent of managing a Fortune 500 company. Except here, the shareholders were a pantheon of gods, and the dividends came in the form of annual floods. And just like the stock market, when the Nile failed to rise, it was time to panic. Yet, despite the challenges, the new kingdom left an indelible mark on history. It was a time of architectural marvels, from the grandeur of Karnak's columns to the serene beauty of Hatshepsut's temple at Deir el-Bahri. And let's not forget the Valley of the Kings, the ultimate resting place for the pharaohs, where Tutankhamun's tomb was discovered, sparking a 20th century media frenzy that would make even Ramses Roman II envious. And so, as we stand amidst the ruins of this once mighty empire, we must remember that the new kingdom was not just about grand conquests and ambitious pharaohs. It was a complex tapestry of politics, economics, and human ambition, woven together by leaders who were as savvy as they were flawed. They left behind a legacy of both awe-inspiring achievements and cautionary tales, reminding us that even the most powerful empires are not immune to the sands of time. As we prepare to delve deeper into the waning days of the New Kingdom, remember, history is an ever-unfolding story, and the Pharaoh's tale is far from over. As the sun set on the New Kingdom, casting long shadows over Egypt's golden empire, the scene was ripe for a dramatic finale. Picture Egypt in the late period. It's like watching your favorite rock band headlining a festival, only to realize they've lost their lead singer and can't quite hit those high notes anymore. Around 1069 BCE, the cracks in the pharaoh's power began to show, and the empire that once strutted across the stage of history started to falter. The late period, stretching from 664 to 332 BCE, was a time when Egypt became the ancient world's revolving door for foreign rulers. The grand narrative of Egyptian power was now punctuated by a series of invasions and internal upheavals that made Game of Thrones look like a family sitcom. First, there were the Libyans, followed by the Kushites, who ruled as the 25th dynasty. Their stint was relatively short-lived, but they left a cultural mark that outlasted their political control. Think of them as the opening act that outshone the headliner. But the real show-stealer, the Assyrians. In 671 BCE, they sacked Memphis, Egypt's then capital, making it clear that the days of Egyptian dominance were numbered. The Assyrians adopted a scorched-earth policy with all the subtlety of a rock concert marsh pit, and their brief but brutal presence paved the way for further instability. Enter the Persians, led by Cambyses Roman II, who in 525 BCE captured Egypt and folded it into the ever-expanding Persian Empire. It was like Egypt had been downgraded from headliner to supporting act. So, why the decline? Well, let's talk economics. While Egypt was still rich in resources, internal strife and corruption were sucking the life out of the treasury faster than a sandstorm in the Sahara. The Nile, once the country's ATM, became a fickle partner. Inconsistent flooding meant unpredictable harvests, and when your economy is as agrarian as Egypt's, that's a problem as big as a pyramid. Politically, the pharaoh's one-scion grip was now more like a handshake from a nervous teenager. The centralized power that had built pyramids and temples was now a hot potato, tossed between dynasties like a game of historical musical chairs. And with every new ruler, the bureaucracy, once the backbone of Egyptian governance, became more bloated and inefficient. It's the ancient equivalent of too many cooks spoiling the broth, only here the cooks were pharaohs, and the broth was an entire civilization. Externally, Egypt faced pressures from rising powers around the Mediterranean. The Greeks were becoming the new kids on the block, flexing their muscles and philosophizing their way into the annals of history. In 332 BCE, Alexander the Great, the Macedonian wonderkind, sauntered into Egypt with all the confidence of someone who's never heard the word no. The Egyptians, tired of Persian rule, greeted him not as a conqueror, but as a liberator. Talk about a PR win. Alexander's arrival marked the end of the pharaoh's reign and the beginning of the Hellenistic period in Egypt. His conquest was not just a takeover, it was a cultural facelift. Alexandria, the city he founded, became a beacon of learning and culture, a place where Egyptian, Greek, and later Roman influences mingled like an ancient world's version of a hipster coffee shop. And yet, even as the pharaohs' political power waned, their legacy endured. The mythic allure of the pharaohs, those god kings straddling the divine and the mortal, continued to capture imaginations long after their crowns had been placed on dusty museum shelves. Their monumental achievements, be they pyramids, temples, or the very concept of kingship, were stitched into the tapestry of human history. But let's not get too misty-eyed. The Pharaoh's legacy is also a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power and the hubris of leaders who believed themselves infallible. They remind us that even the mightiest can fall, and that history, much like the Nile, has a way of ebbing and flowing. In reflecting on the Pharaohs, we're left with a picture that's as much about the people who built the pyramids as it is about the rulers who dreamed them up. It's about the scribes who chronicled their reigns, the artisans who immortalized their images, and the laborers who toiled under the desert sun. The Pharaoh's story is one of human ambition and folly, of dreams that reached for the stars, but were grounded by the realities of earthly existence. So, as we wrap up this saga of sand, stone, and sovereignty, take with you this. History is not just a series of dates and names. It's a living, breathing narrative that speaks to the human condition. The Pharaohs, for all their grandeur and glory, were as human as the rest of us. They dreamed, they schemed, and sometimes they fell short. But in their rise and fall, they left us with lessons as enduring as the monuments they built. And as we stand in their shadow today, we're not just looking back. We're gazing into the mirror of time, reflecting on the eternal dance of power, legacy, and the human spirit. In the grand tapestry of human history, there's a special place for those trailblazers who decided to swap their nomadic life for something a bit more stationary. Enter the Sumerians, around 4,500 BCE, the original overachievers of Mesopotamia, nowadays southern Iraq. These were the folks who got the civilization ball rolling, and boy, did they roll it far. They didn't just plant a seed, they planted an entire urban jungle, complete with some of the first cities the world had ever seen. Now, let's get this straight. When people talk about the first civilization, they're not just talking about a bunch of people who figured out how to grow grain. No, the Sumerians were the overachieving, hyper personalities of the ancient world. We're talking about the people who invented the wheel. That's right. The next time you roll your eyes at the thought of changing a flat tire, remember you owe that frustration to these ancient innovators. The Sumerians lived in a place called Mesopotamia, which literally means land between rivers. Specifically, the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers. Now, if you ever thought about prime real estate, this was it. These rivers provided fertile soil, which allowed for a surplus of food. Surplus food meant people could spend their time doing things other than just trying to survive, like inventing riding, for instance. Yes, cuneiform, the world's first writing system, was born here. It wasn't exactly Shakespeare, but it got the job done. Speaking of writing, cuneiform wasn't just a fun party trick. It served some very practical purposes. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of a spreadsheet. They used it to keep track of things like taxes, which, let's be honest, nobody asked for. Seriously, who wakes up one day and thinks, you know what this civilization needs? A system for collecting more of our hard-earned barley. But alas, taxes were a thing, even in Uruk, the bustling metropolis of the Sumerian world, with a population of around 50,000. Uruk wasn't just any city. It was New York before New York was cool. People flocked to Uruk like moths to a flame. Why? Because it was the place to be, the beating heart of Sumerian civilization. It had ziggurats, which were like the ancient version of skyscrapers, minus the elevators and window cleaners. These massive structures were a testament to the Sumerians' architectural prowess and religious devotion. And let's not forget their urban planning. They didn't just slap houses wherever there was space. They planned things out, creating roads and districts like they were modeling for Sim City. But let's hit the brakes for a second and debunk a myth. People often romanticize the Sumerians as these mystical, enlightened beings because they could read and write. But in reality, much of their writing was about mundane topics, like sheep and barley, not epic tales of heroism. Sure, they had the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is an ancient literary masterpiece, but most of their tablets were more about keeping the lights on, literally and metaphorically. And let's talk about the wheel. It's easy to imagine some Sumerian Einstein inventing this thing and changing the course of history overnight. In truth, the wheel's invention was more of a gradual evolution than a eureka moment. Initially used for pottery, it took a while before someone thought, hey, what if we put this thing on a cart? But once they did, it revolutionized trade and transportation. Suddenly, moving goods from point to B didn't require the back-breaking labor it once did. So, why did all of this matter? Well, the Sumerians laid the groundwork for pretty much everything. Their innovations in riding, architecture, and urban planning were the building blocks for future civilizations. They showed the world that humans could not only survive but thrive in a complex society. They taught us that with a little ingenuity and a lot of clay tablets, we could build something lasting. But it's not all shiny wheels and cuneiform tablets. Sumerians faced their share of challenges. They were often at odds with neighboring city-states, and their land, though fertile, was not without its problems. The rivers that provided life-giving water could also bring devastating floods. It was a constant game of risk versus reward, and the Sumerians had to be as much engineers as they were farmers. In conclusion, the Sumerians were the original movers and shakers of the ancient world. They didn't just contribute to civilization, they practically invented the concept. So the next time you're stuck in traffic or swamped with paperwork, take a moment to thank, or maybe curse, the Sumerians. After all, they're the reason we have wheels and riding, and yes, even taxis. Let's dive back into the life of the Sumerians, who, unlike us, couldn't depend on Amazon Prime for their every whim. These folks had to get creative with their trade routes and barter systems, and let me tell you, it wasn't as simple as adding to cart. Now, in a world where 2-day shipping was an impossible dream, how did they keep the wheels of commerce turning? Well, let's just say they had a knack for making the impossible possible. First off, forget your fancy credit cards. The Sumerians were all about the barter system. Picture a marketplace buzzing with traders swapping goods like sheep, barley, and textiles. It was a bit like your local farmer's market, but with more emphasis on livestock and grain. The Sumerians traded everything from food and clothing to tools and crafts, using a system that relied heavily on the direct exchange of goods. Got a surplus of barley but need a new plow. Find a neighbor willing to trade, and bam, you've got yourself a deal. This was the original eBay, minus the bidding wars. But let's be real, a society can't thrive on barter alone. Enter the silver shekel, one of the earliest forms of currency. This wasn't just a shiny piece of metal, it was revolutionary. The shekel allowed the Sumerians to assign a specific value to goods and services. It was like discovering fire, but for trade. Instead of lugging around a cart full of barley to trade for a goat, you could use a shekel to get the job done. This innovation simplified transactions and paved the way for more complex economic systems. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of finally ditching your Nokia 3310 for a smartphone. Speaking of barley, let's not gloss over its significance. This wasn't just the Sumerian breakfast of champions, it was a staple of their economy. Barley was used not only for food, but also as a form of currency. In fact, wages were often paid in barley. Imagine getting your paycheck in the form of grain. It might sound a bit strange today, but back then it was as good as gold. Well, almost. But why barley, you ask? The answer lies in agriculture, the backbone of Sumerian civilization. These clever folks figured out how to tame the wild and unpredictable Tigris and Euphrates rivers with irrigation systems that were nothing short of engineering marvels. They built canals, dikes, and reservoirs to control the water flow. This wasn't just about growing crops. It was about creating stability and ensuring survival. In a place where rainfall was about as reliable as a politician's promise, irrigation was life. The Sumerians turned arid desert land into fertile fields, allowing them to produce enough food to support large urban populations. In a way, their irrigation systems were as essential to them as Wi-Fi is to us. No Wi-Fi, no life. No irrigation, no civilization. Now, let's debunk a cozy little myth. There's this romantic notion that the Sumerians lived in some Eden-like paradise of endless bounty, thanks to their clever irrigation. The reality, it was more like a never-ending battle against nature. Every year, the rivers threatened to flood their fields, and each time, the Sumerians had to outsmart them. It was a bit like playing a perpetual game of chess with Mother Nature, where one wrong move could wipe out their entire food supply. But why did all this matter? Well, by mastering agriculture and trade, the Sumerians laid the foundations for economic systems that would influence generations to come. They showed us that with a bit of ingenuity and a lot of hard work, humans could build thriving societies even in the harshest environments. They taught us that commerce doesn't just happen. It takes creativity and determination to make it work. As we move forward, let's keep an eye on the Sumerians' socio-political landscape. Their economic prowess wasn't just about making ends meet. It was about creating a society where culture, politics, and economy were interwoven like a finely crafted tapestry. Stay tuned, because this story is far from over. The Sumerians were just getting started, and so are we. And so, amidst the bustling markets and barley-fueled economy, the Sumerians laid the groundwork for another cornerstone of civilization, the art of governance. But let's be clear, when we're talking Sumerian politics, we're not talking about your run-of-the-mill city council meeting. These folks were the OGs of the city-state system, each with its own ruler, guards, and importantly, its set of laws. It's like they invented the concept of federalism before it was cool. The Sumerians organized their world into a patchwork of city-states, each more like a mini-kingdom than what we'd consider a city today. Uruk, Lagash, and Eridu were just a few of the big players. Imagine a landscape dotted with cities that operated like independent countries, each with its own divine patron and king. These kings weren't your average power-hungry monarchs either. No, they claimed a direct line to the gods, a sort of spiritual Wi-Fi that granted them divine legitimacy. Talk about an ancient PR campaign. Forget about spinning the latest election poll. These guys were spinning tales straight from the heavens. Now, these kings weren't just sitting on thrones twiddling their thumbs. They were busy enacting laws, leading armies, and of course, collecting taxes, because some things never change. But let's zoom in on one particular king who decided to take law and order to a whole new level. Enter Ur-Nammu, ruler of Ur around 2100 BCE, who decided that his kingdom needed a little more structure. The result, the Code of Ur-Nammu, one of the oldest known law codes in the world. And before you roll your eyes thinking this was some dusty tablet filled with archaic rules, consider this. This code was a game changer. Ur-Nammu's code was a collection of laws inscribed on clay tablets, and it laid out everything from property rights to marriage laws. We're talking about legal clauses that dealt with everything from compensation for injuries to fines for adultery. And here's the kicker. It wasn't just about punishment, but also about fairness. The code emphasized compensatory justice over harsh retribution, which was revolutionary for its time. In a world where the mantra, an eye for an eye, was taken quite literally, Ur-Nammu's approach was, dare I say, almost progressive. Now, let's bust a myth while we're at it. The eye for an eye concept from ancient codes like these has been romanticized as a kind of divine justice, but in reality, it was more about keeping the peace. In an era where family feuds could escalate faster than a Twitter beef, a codified system of justice was crucial for stability. These laws weren't about creating utopias. They were about managing chaos. It was less about morality and more about pragmatism. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of setting ground rules for a particularly rowdy game night. But let's not give Ur-Nammu all the spotlight. The Sumerian kings were masters of their own brand of divine advertising. They didn't just rule, they ruled with a celestial mandate. Take the famous king Gilgamesh of Uruk, who was as much a legend as a ruler. Half god, half man, and all charisma, Gilgamesh's story was immortalized in the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the world's oldest known works of literature. This wasn't just about glorifying a king. It was about crafting a narrative that intertwined the divine with the mortal. Talk about a timeless PR strategy. Make your leader a legend, and people might just overlook the occasional tax hike. And yet, for all their divine pretensions, these kings had to grapple with very earthly challenges. Ruling a Sumerian city-state was no stroll through the ziggurat. These leaders had to manage resources, fend off rival city-states, and keep the guards appeased. Imagine juggling flaming torches while riding a unicycle, and you might get a sense of the balancing act they performed. The city-states were constantly at each other's throats, vying for control over fertile land and trade routes. In this cutthroat game, diplomacy and warfare were two sides of the same clay tablet. But why did all of this matter? The political structures of the Sumerians set the stage for future civilizations. They created a blueprint for governance that balanced power between the divine and the earthly. This wasn't just about ruling a city. It was about establishing a framework for society. The Sumerians showed that governance could be more than mere tyranny. It could be a complex interplay of laws, divine authority, and civic duty. They taught us that power wasn't just about who held the biggest spear, but who wielded the sharpest mind. As we continue our journey through the Sumerian world, let's keep our eyes on how these political innovations influenced the societies that followed. The Sumerians were more than just rulers. They were pioneers of a new way of thinking about governance and society. Their legacy is not just etched in clay tablets, but also in the very fabric of civilization. Stay with us as we unravel more of this ancient tapestry, because, believe it or not, the Sumerians still have a few tricks up their sleeves. The adventure is far from over, and there's much more to discover about these trailblazers of the ancient world. Now, as we edge closer to the heart of Sumerian culture, it's time to shift our gaze from the political chessboard to the vibrant tapestry of everyday life. And oh boy, did these folks know how to live, or at least worship, their way through the week. The Sumerians might not have had Netflix, but they had something infinitely more complex: religion. And when I say complex, I mean their pantheon of gods could make the Greek mythology look like a cozy family dinner. Ever heard of an Enlil and Inanna? These were not just deities, they were the celestial bigwigs running the divine show. Let's start with the sky god and the head honcho, the Zeus before Zeus was Zeus, and was the ultimate authority, the celestial CEO, if you will. Then there's Enlil, the god of air, wind and storms. Think of him as the guy you didn't want to tick off unless you fancied a hurricane for a weekend getaway. And Inanna, she was the goddess of war and love, a multitasker, if ever there was one. It's like having Cupid and Ares rolled into one with a dash of ancient Sumerian flair. But here's the kicker. These gods weren't just distant figures sitting pretty on a cloud. No, they were as involved in daily life as your average nosy neighbor. The Sumerians believed the gods influenced everything from the harvest to the outcome of wars, and they didn't just cross their fingers and hope for the best. They built ziggurats, massive tiered structures that were the architectural love children of a pyramid and a wedding cake. These weren't just for decoration, mind you. They were the stairways to heaven, or at least the Sumerian version of it. Ziggurats were the epicenter of religious life, the skyscrapers of the spiritual world. Imagine standing at the base of one, peering up at the imposing edifice reaching for the stars. It wasn't just about the height, it was about the message. Look at us, the Sumerians seemed to say. We're building bridges to the gods. And who was responsible for maintaining this divine connection? The priests, of course. These were the folks who played the ultimate game of telephone, relaying messages between the earthly and the divine. Priests held immense power, serving as intermediaries in a literal game of life and death. They were the original influencers, shaping public opinion and guiding daily life. And while some might dreamily imagine them as serene figures in flowing robes, the reality was a bit more bureaucratic. These guys were the keepers of rituals, the organizers of feasts, and the ones who ensured that the guards were kept in a good mood. No small feat when your pantheon is as temperamental as a soap opera cast. Now, let's talk about a topic that might be closer to home: beer. Yes, beer. The Sumerians weren't just about high-minded religious pursuits. They also knew how to unwind. Beer was the nectar of the gods, a gift from them, so much so that it was practically a food group. The average Sumerian's diet included barley, bread, and beer, a combo that sounds like a hipster brunch menu. They even had a goddess of beer, Ninkasi, proving that some priorities really are timeless. You see, beer wasn't just a drink. It was a social glue. It was consumed daily, playing a central role in gatherings and celebrations. And while the modern myth might romanticize ancient drinking sessions as carefree bacchanals, the reality was more grounded. Beer was a safer bet than water, which could be as unpredictable as the Euphrates in flood season. Plus, it provided much-needed nutrients. Forget your protein bars. This was the ancient world's answer to a balanced meal. But why does all this matter? Because the Sumerians, through their gods, rituals, and daily practices, laid the foundation for how societies would intertwine religion and culture. They showed us that belief systems could unite people, give structure to their lives, and influence everything from architecture to agriculture. They taught us that while humanity may change certain aspects, like the need for community, spirituality, and let's be honest, a good drink, remain timeless. As we navigate through this ancient world, one thing's clear. The Sumerians weren't just building cities. They were crafting a civilization rich in tradition, belief, and daily life. And as we continue our journey, keep in mind that the Sumerians' legacy isn't just about what they built, but how they lived. The adventure isn't over yet. There's still more to uncover about these ancient architects of society. Stay tuned, because the Sumerians have a few more surprises in store. And who knows, perhaps a lesson or two for our own modern lives. So as we sip on this ancient brew called history, let's toast to the Sumerians' legacy, which has aged like a fine wine, or perhaps a well-crafted barley beer. You see, their story didn't just end with them trudging through the daily grind of an ancient world. Oh no, the Sumerians were the original trendsetters, the influencers of antiquity. Picture them as the hipsters of the ancient world, sporting their cuneiform tablets like the latest tech gadget and setting the stage for all things civilization. But before we get too carried away imagining them as the ancient Steve Jobs, let's break down why they really mattered. For starters, let's talk about their legal contributions. The Code of Ur-Nammu wasn't just an exercise in legalese. It was a blueprint for justice that echoed through the ages. This code laid the groundwork for what would eventually become more elaborate legal systems, like Hammurabi's Code. Sure, that one gets all the fame with its eye for an eye drama, but Ur-Nammu's code was the unsung hero, quietly emphasizing fairness and compensation over pure retribution. It was the legal equivalent of choosing mediation over a courtroom showdown. The Sumerians showed that a society could be governed by more than brute force. It could be governed by laws that aim to be, dare we say, civilized. And speaking of civilizations, the Sumerians were downright architectural geniuses. Those ziggurats, they weren't just pretty piles of mud bricks. They proved that humans could create structures that were both functional and awe-inspiring. The Sumerians knew that a well-built structure could outlast generations, much like their influence. These edifices were the precursors to monumental architecture, inspiring everything from the pyramids in Egypt to the grand temples of Greece. The Sumerians laid the bricks, others just built on top of them. Now, let's not gloss over the literary contributions that the Sumerians brought to the table. The Epic of Gilgamesh isn't just an ancient yarn. It's the template for the hero's journey that has captivated audiences for millennia. From Odysseus to Frodo, Gilgamesh was the O.G. adventurer, the original hero grappling with questions of mortality and meaning. The Sumerians weren't just writing stories. They were exploring the depths of the human condition. They taught us that storytelling is more than entertainment. It's a way to grapple with the big questions of life. And while Gilgamesh might not have had to deal with traffic jams or Wi-Fi outages, his quest for immortality is something we can all relate to on some level. But it wasn't all epic tales and grand architecture. The Sumerians also faced their share of challenges, particularly from Mother Nature. The very rivers that nourished their civilization were also the harbingers of its downfall. Over time, the soil became salinized from the constant irrigation, turning fertile land into a barren wasteland. It was like a slow-motion ecological disaster, the ancient equivalent of climate change. The Sumerians learned the hard way that taming nature is a double-edged sword. Their decline was a cautionary tale about the delicate balance between human ambition and environmental stewardship. And let's not forget the political tensions. Those city-states that once thrived independently began to clash like siblings, fighting over the last piece of cake. Internal strife and external invasions chipped away at the Sumerian hegemony. By around 2004 BCE, the last great Sumerian city-state, fell to the Elamites. It was a sobering reminder that no matter how advanced a civilization becomes, it's always vulnerable to the winds of change, or in this case, the swords of an invading army. So why does all this matter? Because the Sumerians weren't just a footnote in history. They were the prologue. They laid the foundations for everything that came after, from legal systems and literature to architecture and agriculture. They taught us that civilization is a complex tapestry, woven from threads of innovation, ambition, and sometimes hubris. Their legacy is a testament to human ingenuity and its limits. They showed us that while we may not have all the answers, we can certainly ask the right questions. And so, as we wrap up this journey through the world of the Sumerians, let's take a moment to appreciate their enduring impact. They might not have had the internet, but their innovations laid the groundwork for the interconnected world we live in today. From the wheel to writing, from laws to legends, the Sumerians were the architects of civilization, sketching the blueprints for future societies to follow. So the next time you send a text, drive a car, or even enjoy a cold beer, remember that you're standing on the shoulders of giants, those ancient innovators who dared to dream of a world beyond survival. In the end, the Sumerians remind us that history isn't just a series of dates and events. It's a story, our story, of how humans, for all their flaws and failures, have continually strived to build, to create, and to understand. And while the sands of time may have buried their cities, the legacy of the Sumerians lives on, etched into the very fabric of society. So here's to the Sumerians, the original movers and shakers, the pioneers of civilization, and the dreamers who dared to think big. History may have moved on, but their impact is timeless. In the annals of history, few characters are as simultaneously feared and admired as Genghis Khan. This guy was the ultimate underdog turned global powerhouse. Imagine a teenager who's not just struggling with the usual adolescent awkwardness, but is straight up kidnapped, shackled, and probably thinking his life is about to take a very unpleasant turn. That teenager was Temujin, who would later become the Great Khan, a title that would ring through the ages like a medieval rock star with a world tour that spanned from China to Eastern Europe. Temujin's story kicks off in 1162 on the Mongolian steppes, where he was born into the Borjigin clan. Right off the bat, life dealt him a hand that screamed struggle bus. His dad, Yesujay, was poisoned by a rival tribe when Temujin was just 9. Suddenly, the family went from being one of the respected clans to social pariahs. It's like one day you're the CEO of a thriving startup, and the next, you're couch surfing with no Wi-Fi. With his father's death, Temujin's family was cast out, forced to fend for themselves in a harsh landscape that wasn't exactly known for its hospitality. The Mongolian steppes were less about lush pastures and more about surviving on wild onions and marmots. In this survivalist nightmare, Temujin learned the art of scraping by, a skill that would prove invaluable in his later ventures. But let's hit pause on the Great Khan montage. The truth is, Temujin's rise wasn't just about his sheer willpower or martial prowess. Sure, he was a battlefield genius, but his ascent was as much about political savvy as it was about swinging a sword. Step 1. Alliances. Temujin was a master networker long before LinkedIn made it cool. He knew aligning with the right people was crucial, whether they were blood relatives or former enemies. Take Jamaka, for example. He was Temujin's blood brother, probably the closest thing to a BFF in the brutal world of the steppes. They swore an oath of eternal brotherhood, which sounds sweet until you remember that their friendship eventually imploded in a spectacularly bloody fashion. But in those early days, the alliance with Jamaka provided Temujin with the much-needed muscle and support to start making waves in the Mongolian power pool. Now, it wasn't all smooth sailing. In fact, Temujin's early life was a series of unfortunate events that would make Lemony Snicket look like a sitcom. The kidnapping incident I mentioned earlier, that was courtesy of the Teochead, a rival tribe that decided a 16-year-old Temujin was a threat worth larking up. But here's the kicker, he escaped. With the help of a sympathetic guard, Temujin pulled off a daring getaway, signaling to the world that this kid wasn't going down without a fight. Fast forward a few years, and Temujin started amassing followers, not because he had a great Instagram feed, but because he offered something radical, loyalty and meritocracy. In a world where tribal loyalties were often fickle and leadership was inherited rather than earned, Temujin's approach was revolutionary. He didn't care about your lineage. He wanted capable warriors, and he rewarded them regardless of their background. This was less Game of Thrones and more of a Silicon Valley startup ethos. Disrupt the old guard, innovate, and reward talent. By 1206, Temujin had unified the Mongolian steppe tribes through a combination of strategic alliances, battlefield victories, a little bit of good old-fashioned intimidation. He was declared Genghis Khan, which means universal ruler, a title that was as much about PR as it was about reality. But let's not kid ourselves. The road to this point was paved with more than a few skulls. Genghis Khan's unification campaign was brutal. Tribes that didn't want to join the Mongol fold often found themselves on the wrong side of his wrath, which typically involved a lot of horsemen, arrows, and not much mercy. The legend of Genghis Khan as a military genius and unifier is often romanticized, but let's inject a dose of reality. This was a guy who understood raw power and wasn't afraid to use it. He was a strategic mastermind, yes, but also a ruthless operator who saw the world in very pragmatic terms. The Mongol Empire's expansion was less of a fairy tale and more of a hostile corporate takeover, with Genghis Khan as the ultimate CEO who didn't do coffee meetings. He did cavalry charges. The political and social factors that enabled his conquests were intricate. The Mongolian steppes were a land of fractured tribes and constant warfare, a real-life Wild West where the quickest draw, or in this case, the fastest horse, often won the day. Genghis Khan capitalized on this chaotic environment, consolidating power and reshaping Mongolian society to support his vision of conquest. He introduced laws, known as the Yasa, which were designed to unify his empire under one set of rules. Think of it as the first step towards a centralized government, complete with a legal system that was as brutal as it was effective. Genghis Khan's rise was also facilitated by the weaknesses of his opponents. The neighboring empires were often embroiled in their own internal strife, making them ripe for conquest. The Jin dynasty in China, for instance, was politically fragmented, and the Khwarezmian Empire was caught off guard by the Mongol onslaught. It was like watching a master chess player taking on opponents who couldn't stop arguing over who gets to play white. So, while the mythos of the great Khan paints him as an almost mythical warrior who could part rivers and summon lightning, the truth is both more mundane and more impressive. He was a man who clawed his way up from obscurity through a combination of grit, cunning, and ruthless efficiency. Genghis Khan didn't just conquer lands. He reshaped the political landscape of the medieval world, setting the stage for the largest contiguous empire in history. And he did it all without a single motivational TED talk. Now, speaking of Genghis Khan's conquests, let's dive into the Mongol secret sauce, a recipe that combined military brilliance with logistics that would make a modern-day supply chain manager weep with envy. Forget the image of ragtag horsemen galloping across the plains in a dusty whirlwind of chaos. The Mongol army was a well-oiled machine, and Genghis was the ultimate conductor, orchestrating a symphony of conquest. Let's start with their military tactics, which were as innovative as they were devastating. Ever heard of the feigned retreat? It's like the classic bait-and switch, but with more horses and fewer ethics. The Mongols would pretend to flee, luring their enemies into a false sense of victory. Just when their foes thought they had the upper hand, the Mongols would pivot, encircle them, and unleash a storm of arrows. It was psychological warfare at its finest, and it worked like a charm against many a complacent foe. Now, you might be wondering how they kept this massive war machine running. Picture this, a Mongol warrior riding into battle with not one, not two, but up to 5 horses. It's like having a personal carpool of horsepower, literally. This allowed them to ride hard and fast, swapping mounts to avoid exhausting any single one. The result, an army that could cover 100 miles a day, a feat that left their enemies in the dust and their logistics officers feeling like overachievers. The Mongols were pioneers in the art of communication, too. They had a sophisticated relay system known as the Yam, a sort of medieval postal service on steroids. Imagine a network of messenger stations spread across the empire, where riders could swap horses and send messages faster than a pigeon could sneeze. This allowed Genghis Khan to maintain a tight grip on his sprawling empire, issuing orders and gathering intelligence with the speed and efficiency that would put FedEx to shame. But let's not forget the human element of their military genius. The Mongols were masters of adaptation, capable of adjusting their tactics to suit different terrains and enemies. In the deserts of Central Asia, they fought as nomadic horsemen. In the lush valleys of China, they mastered siege warfare, employing engineers to build catapults and battering rams. They even learned to use gunpowder from the Chinese, turning it against them in spectacular, fiery fashion. So, what about the stereotype of the Mongols as uncivilized barbarians rampaging across the land? It's a narrative that's as misleading as it is persistent. Yes, they were fierce and often ruthless in battle, but they were far from mindless brutes. Their campaigns were meticulously planned and executed with a level of precision that would make a Swiss watchmaker blush. Genghis Khan himself valued intelligence and learning, often sparing scholars and artisans to enrich his empire. Economically, the Mongol conquests reshaped the world. They opened up the Silk Road, transforming it into a superhighway of trade and cultural exchange. Goods, ideas, and technologies flowed across continents like never before. It was globalization before the term existed, and it proved that while the Mongols could be brutal conquerors, they were also facilitators of an interconnected world. The Mongol army was an equal opportunity employer, too. Genghis Khan's meritocratic approach meant that talent, not birthright, determined your rank. This wasn't just a feel-good HR slogan. It was a revolutionary concept in a feudal world where lineage often trumped ability. As a result, the Mongol military was a melting pot of cultures and skills, drawing on the strengths of its diverse recruits to create an unstoppable force. In their conquests, the Mongols employed a carrot-and-stick approach to governance. Surrender and enjoy the benefits of the Pax Mongolica, a period of peace and stability that allowed trade and culture to flourish. Resist and face a wrath that could turn your city into a cautionary tale for future generations. This pragmatic strategy ensured that once conquered, territories remained relatively stable, providing a steady flow of resources and tribute back to the heart of the empire. Genghis Khan's legacy in military strategy is unassailable, but it's important to remember that his success was also built on the backs of countless warriors who believed in his vision. These were men who left their homes on the steppes, riding into the unknown, driven by a leader who promised them glory and riches. And while the Mongol Empire eventually fragmented, the echoes of their conquests can still be felt in the political and cultural landscapes of the regions they touched. So, when you hear the name Genghis Khan, think not just of the conqueror who built an empire from nothing, but also of the strategist who revolutionized warfare and governance. The Mongols were more than just a horde. They were a force of nature that reshaped the medieval world, leaving a legacy that endures to this day. As we continue to explore their impact, remember that history is rarely as simple as the myths we tell ourselves. It's complex, messy, and infinitely more interesting, and the Mongols are no exception. Stay tuned for more tales from the steppes, where the story of the Mongol Empire continues to unfold. As we gallop from the battlefield to the bustling bazaars, let's dive into the economic ripple effects of the Mongol Empire, whose impact wasn't just the stuff of warlords and warring factions. The Mongols were the original globalization gurus, transforming the Silk Road into a veritable autobahn of commerce. Forget about your local farmers' market. This was trade on a scale that would make Jeff Bezos consider adding a few extra prime planes to the fleet. Before Genghis Khan's cavalry kicked up the dust, the Silk Road was more like a series of loosely connected dirt paths where merchants braced for bandits as much as they did for bargaining. The Mongols, with their penchant for order mixed with a healthy dose of intimidation, made these routes as safe as they could be given the medieval context. Their Pax Mongolica, a rare period of relative peace across Asia, meant that traders could travel from Europe to China with less fear of meeting a sticky end at the hands of opportunistic outlaws. Think of it as an early version of safe travels, but with a few more swords involved. The Mongols enforced a sort of trade utopia, complete with the yam system, which, as we mentioned, was like FedEx on horseback. This network not only facilitated military communication, but also revolutionized how goods moved across continents. They established way stations stocked with fresh horses and supplies, making it possible for messages and silk, spices, or whatever trade good was in vogue to move with unprecedented speed. It was logistical genius, the kind that makes modern supply chain managers weep tears of envy. But let's not sugarcoat it. The Mongol Empire's economic policies were a double-edged sword. On the one hand, they ushered in an era of economic expansion that saw the exchange of goods, culture, and ideas on a scale previously unimaginable. On the other, they were as ruthless in commerce as they were in battle. Take, for instance, their tax system, which could make even the IRS seem like a charitable organization. The Mongols imposed heavy tributes on conquered peoples. It was like paying a protection fee, but instead of a local mobster, you were dealing with an empire that stretched from the Yellow Sea to the Danube. Local economies experienced a mix of prosperity and pillaging. Cities along the Silk Road flourished under Mongol rule as they became hubs of activity, drawing in merchants from across the known world. However, woe betide any city that didn't play ball. The Mongols had a zero-tolerance policy for insubordination. Resist, and you might find your city razed to the ground, a grim reminder to others not to step out of line. It was the ultimate carrot-and-stick approach, with the carrot being a bustling marketplace, and the stick being, well, a lot of sticks with pointy ends. While the romanticized image of the Silk Road evokes caravans laden with silks and spices, the harsh reality was that this trade network was also a conduit for less savory exchanges. Diseases, for instance, hitched a ride alongside silk fabrics and exotic spices. The Black Death, that infamous plague that decimated Europe, is believed to have traveled from Asia via these newly bustling trade routes. The Mongols, unwittingly or not, facilitated the spread of one of history's deadliest pandemics. It's a sobering reminder that global connectivity is as much about shared risks as it is about shared riches. Economically, the Mongol Empire was a paradox. Their conquests brought devastation, but their governance allowed for a kind of economic renaissance. They were patrons of artisans and craftsmen, often sparing them during their conquests to enrich Mongol lands. This fostered a cultural exchange that saw ideas and people move across borders like never before. From Persian astronomers to Chinese engineers, the Mongol court was a melting pot of talent, spurred by a leadership that, despite its brutality, recognized the value of brains as much as brawn. The empire's impact on commerce wasn't just about goods and gold. It was about the flow of ideas. The Mongols inadvertently set the stage for the Renaissance by opening up Europe to the wealth of knowledge from the East. Technologies like paper and gunpowder made their way west, reshaping the future of warfare and communication. It's an irony that the Mongols, known for their devastating conquests, also helped lay the groundwork for one of history's most celebrated periods of cultural flourishing. Under Mongol rule, the Silk Road became a superhighway not just for merchants, but for monks, scholars, and adventurers. Marco Polo, the Venetian explorer who served at the court of Kublai Khan, is perhaps the most famous of these travelers. His tales of the riches of the East would spark European interest in exploration and trade, setting the stage for the age of discovery. It's a bit like the ultimate travel blog, inspiring generations to come to look beyond their borders. But the benefits of Mongol rule were not evenly distributed. While some cities prospered, others languished under heavy taxation and the constant threat of violence. The Mongols could be capricious overlords, rewarding loyalty and punishing defiance with equal fervor. This unpredictability meant that while trade flourished, stability was often precarious, contingent on the whims of distant rulers. In the grand tapestry of history, the Mongol Empire's economic legacy is one of both creation and destruction. They were the original disruptors, reshaping the global supply chain centuries before it was cool. And while their methods were often brutal, the interconnected world they fostered would have lasting impacts, echoing through the centuries in ways those horse-mounted warriors could scarcely have imagined. So, as we marvel at the vastness of the Mongol Empire and its economic innovations, let's not forget the price paid by those who lived under its shadow. It's a tale as old as time, the balance of power, prosperity, and peril. The Mongols may have been ruthless, but their legacy is a testament to the complex interplay of conquest and commerce, a saga that continues to inform our modern understanding of globalization and economic exchange. Stay tuned as we delve further into the empire's influence, uncovering more tales of intrigue, ambition, and the human cost of empire building. Now, with the Mongol Empire's economic machine churning like a medieval Wall Street, let's pivot to the nuts and bolts of their governance. Running an empire that sprawled across approximately 9 million square miles wasn't just a matter of might. It was a feat of administrative acrobatics that would put any modern-day bureaucrat into a cold sweat. The Mongols weren't just galloping across the steppes for the thrill of it. These guys had a plan that would make even the most seasoned city planner take notes. First off, let's talk tolerance. Yes, you heard that right. The same Mongols known for their, shall we say, aggressive expansion tactics were surprisingly tolerant of different cultures and religions. It's like finding out your grumpy uncle secretly funds a kitten rescue. Genghis Khan himself declared in the Yasa, his code of laws, that all religions were equal. This wasn't out of some newfound benevolence, but rather cold, hard pragmatism. By allowing conquered peoples to maintain their customs and beliefs, the Mongols avoided unnecessary rebellions and kept their new territories from boiling over. It's like giving everyone a cookie so they don't start throwing punches at the family reunion. Under their rule, religious leaders often enjoyed tax exemptions, and in some cases, They were even given state support. Talk about a sweet gig. While it might seem counterintuitive for a conquering force to support the local clergy, this move was all about stability. By co-opting religious figures, the Mongols ensured that their authority was reinforced by the spiritual leaders whom people trusted. It was a Machiavellian masterstroke that helped them keep the peace without having to constantly resort to the sword. Now, governing such a vast domain required more than just good intentions and tax breaks. Enter the yam system again, not just a postal service, but the administrative backbone of the empire. This network facilitated communication across thousands of miles, ensuring that orders from the Great Khan could reach the farthest flung corners of his realm with impressive speed. Think of it as the original internet, albeit with more horses and fewer cat videos. But here's the rub. Running an empire this extensive wasn't all smooth sailing. The Mongols faced significant administrative challenges, chief among them the sheer diversity of the peoples they ruled. From the Chinese to the Persians, each culture had its own bureaucratic system, language, and way of doing things. It's like trying to run a multinational corporation where each department speaks a different language and has its own set of rules. To tackle this, the Mongols often employed local bureaucrats to manage day-to-day affairs, a strategy that was part genius, part necessity. It allowed them to leverage existing administrative frameworks while keeping a lid on potential unrest. The Mongols also adopted and adapted technologies from their conquered lands. They were like history's version of a tech startup, always on the hunt for the next big innovation to boost efficiency. Chinese paper money. The Mongols were all over it, issuing their own currency and streamlining trade across their vast territories. Persian administrative techniques. You bet they incorporated those too, enhancing their ability to collect taxes and manage resources. This cultural cross-pollination was crucial to the Mongols' ability to govern such a sprawling empire effectively. Despite these innovations, the Mongol Empire was not without its cracks. As the empire expanded, so too did the complexities of its governance. The sheer size of the territory meant that local rulers often operated with a degree of autonomy that would make any control-freak CEO break out in a sweat. In the absence of instant communication, decisions were sometimes made by local governors that didn't always align with the central authority's wishes. This decentralization, while practical, sowed the seeds for future fragmentation. And fragment it did. After Genghis Khan's death in 1227, the empire was divided among his sons and grandsons, each inheriting a chunk of the vast Mongol pie. This division was intended to keep power within the family, but it also led to infighting and rivalries that weakened the empire's cohesion. Imagine trying to run a family business where each sibling has their own vision for success, and none of them are willing to compromise. It's a recipe for chaos, and the Mongol Empire was no exception. The romanticized image of the Mongols as a unified horde led by an all-powerful Khan is a myth that crumbles under historical scrutiny. The reality was far messier, a patchwork quilt of alliances and rivalries that eventually unraveled under the weight of its own complexity. By the late 13th century, the once mighty empire had fractured into several khanates, each governed by a different branch of Genghis Khan's descendants. It was like watching a rock band break up over creative differences, each member going on to pursue their own solo career. These khanates, like the Golden Horde in Russia and the Ilkhanate in Persia, still wielded significant power, but they lacked the unified command that had driven the empire's initial expansion. The Mongol Empire's fragmentation was as much a testament to its initial success as it was to the challenges of maintaining such a sprawling realm. As the old saying goes, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. Yet, even in its decline, the Mongol Empire's influence lingered. The Khanates continued to play pivotal roles in their respective regions, shaping the political and cultural landscapes long after the empire's peak. The remnants of Mongol rule can still be found in everything from the Russian Tsarist autocracy to the architectural wonders of Central Asia. It's a legacy as enduring as it is complex, a testament to the lasting impact of a people who once rode out of the steppes to change the world. As we wrap up this chapter of Mongol history, it's clear that their story is far more nuanced than the simple narratives of conquest and destruction. It's a saga of innovation and adaptation, of brutal pragmatism and unexpected tolerance. The Mongols were both destroyers and builders, conquerors and administrators. Their legacy, a reminder that history is rarely black and white. Stay tuned as we continue to explore the intricate tapestry of the Mongol Empire, unraveling the countless threads that continue to shape our world today. And there you have it, folks, the Mongol Empire in all its complicated, multifaceted glory, a tale of contradictions, a saga of both destruction and innovation. But before we hang up our historical hat, let's dive into the final act of this epic play, the decline and fall of an empire that once seemed as unstoppable as a runaway train with a full head of steam. Now, we've already touched on the fact that splitting the empire among Genghis Khan's descendants was like handing a set of car keys to a group of teenagers and expecting them not to crash. Spoiler alert, they did. As the 13th century drew to a close, the sprawling Mongol Empire began to fracture like a poorly baked pie crust. In fact, by 1294, just a mere 67 years after Genghis Khan's death, the empire had divided into 4 major khanates, each operating like its own independent kingdom. You've got the Yuan dynasty in China, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, the Ilkhanate in Persia, and the Golden Horde in the Russian steppes. Think of it as a dysfunctional family reunion, where everyone's too busy bickering to remember they're supposed to be on the same team. A cocktail of internal strife and external pressures brewed the perfect storm for this fragmentation. The Mongols weren't just battling each other for supremacy. They were also fending off increasingly organized resistance from the lands they had conquered. Local populations, once cowed by the Mongols' fearsome reputation, began to push back as the central authority weakened. Take the Yuan dynasty in China, for instance. By the mid-14th century, the Chinese were fed up with Mongol rule, leading to the Red Turban Rebellion and the eventual rise of the Ming dynasty. In 1368, the Mongols were booted out of China like a bad tenant, marking the end of their rule in the region. It was a classic case of out with the old, in with the new, as the Ming dynasty ushered in a period of revitalization and cultural flourishing. Meanwhile, in Persia, the Ilkhanate was experiencing its own set of headaches. The death of their last effective ruler, Abu Sa'id Bahadur Khan, in 1335, without a clear successor, left a power vacuum that was swiftly filled by chaos and infighting. Persia became a patchwork of competing factions, and the once mighty Ilkhanate crumbled into a series of petty kingdoms. It's a bit like watching a blockbuster movie franchise fizzle out with a series of lackluster sequels, each one less coherent than the last. And let's not forget the Golden Horde, which, contrary to its glamorous name, was far from golden in its later years. By the late 14th century, it was hemorrhaging territory like a leaky bucket. The Russian principalities, long under the Mongol thumb, began to assert their independence. In 1380, the Battle of Kulikovo saw the Russian forces, led by Dmitry Donskoy, deliver a significant blow to Mongol dominance, sowing the seeds for the future rise of a unified Russian state. So, what went wrong? Well, managing an empire of this magnitude was no small feat, and the Mongols, for all their early successes, were eventually outdone by the sheer complexity of their conquests. The vast distances, diverse cultures, and lack of a cohesive central authority made it increasingly difficult to hold everything together. It's like trying to juggle flaming swords while riding a unicycle on a tightrope. Eventually, something's going to give. But here's where the Mongol Empire's story takes an interesting turn. Even as it unraveled, the legacy of the Mongols continued to shape the world. Their initial conquests had laid the groundwork for a level of cultural and economic exchange that would have been unimaginable before their rise. The Silk Road, once a perilous trek for the brave or foolhardy, became a bustling artery of commerce, linking east and west in a way that would profoundly impact global history. It's a testament to the dual nature of the Mongol legacy. On one hand, they were the architects of destruction, their conquests leaving a trail of devastation that still echoes through history. On the other, they were the unwitting midwives of cultural renaissance, their empire a crucible where ideas, technologies, and cultures mingled in a melting pot of human creativity. From the diffusion of gunpowder technology to the spread of printing innovations, the the Mongols played an indirect but crucial role in shaping the modern world. And let's not forget their impact on governance. The Mongols, despite their reputation for brutality, were surprisingly progressive when it came to administration. Their meritocratic approach to leadership, valuing skill over lineage, was a stark departure from the aristocratic norms of the time. It was a revolutionary idea that, while it didn't always translate into stable governance, set a precedent that would be echoed in future political systems. Of course, the romanticized image of the Mongols as gallant warriors and enlightened rulers often glosses over the harsh realities. The truth is, the Mongol conquests were frequently brutal, their campaigns characterized by widespread slaughter and destruction. Cities that resisted were often razed, their inhabitants exterminated or enslaved. The romantic legends of Genghis Khan as a noble conqueror clash with the grim realities of his campaigns, where the cost of empire building was measured in human lives. Yet despite, or perhaps because of, these contradictions, the Mongol Empire remains a fascinating chapter in world history. It's a reminder of the cyclical nature of empires, how they rise, expand, and eventually fall, leaving behind a complex legacy of triumphs and tragedies. The Mongols, for all their ferocity, were also agents of change, their empire a catalyst for the kind of global interconnectedness that we often take for granted today. In the end, the Mongol Empire story is about the delicate balance between power and vulnerability, innovation and tradition, unity and division. It's a tale as old as time, one that echoes through the ages and reminds us of the impermanence of even the mightiest empires. History, in its infinite complexity, is a tapestry of human endeavor, woven with threads of ambition, folly, and resilience. And the Mongols, those legendary horsemen of the steppes, are forever a part of that rich and intricate fabric. So, the next time you think of the Mongols, remember them not just as conquerors, but as a driving force that helped shape the world as we know it, a testament to the enduring power of history's grand narratives. If you want to talk about a guy who could charm a Roman toga off its wearer while simultaneously juggling political alliances like flaming swords, look no further than Gaius Julius Caesar. Yeah, that's right, the man, the myth, the headache-inducing legend of ancient Rome. Before he was the face of a calendar page, Caesar was a financial Houdini and an alliance whisperer who turned his tangled web of debts into a launching pad for one of history's most audacious careers. Born in 100 BCE, give or take a few years, because ancient record-keeping was about as reliable as a politician's promises, Caesar wasn't exactly born with a silver spoon, more like a bronze one at best. The Julii clan was patrician, sure, but they weren't exactly swimming in cash. Caesar's early life was a lesson in the fine art of leveraging what you've got, which in his case meant an illustrious family name and an uncanny ability to make friends in high places. We're talking connections tighter than a gladiator's grip on his sword. Now, Caesar's early political career could be summed up as a masterclass in the fake-it-till-you-make-it strategy, with a side of, oops, I'm in debt again. He started his climb up the greasy political pole as a military tribune, then on to a quaestor gig in Hispania. But it was his consulship in 59 BCE that really set the stage for his grand entrance onto Rome's political catwalk. Picture this: Caesar, newly minted consul, standing at the epicenter of Roman politics with debts as high as the Palatine Hill. Some estimates put his debt at around 25 million sesterces. That's a lot of zeros, folks. For context, a Roman soldier earned about 900 sesterces a year. Do the math, and you'll see Caesar's financial hole was about as deep as the Mariana Trench. But did Caesar let a little thing like soul-crushing debt slow him down? Please. Caesar had the financial finesse of a Wall Street broker with a crystal ball. He was the original too-big-to-fail case study. His solution: marry wisely and make friends in even higher places. Enter Cornelia, Cinna's daughter, and later Calpurnia, the daughter of a wealthy senator. These marriages weren't just romantic entanglements. They were strategic moves on the chessboard of Roman politics, each wife bringing a dowry that helped Caesar chip away at his debt like a sculptor with a marble block. And then there was the first triumvirate. If you think modern politics has strange bedfellows, get a load of this trio: Caesar, Crassus, and Pompey. Crassus, the Roman equivalent of a billionaire with a penchant for putting out fires. literally. He owned a fire brigade, was the moneybags Caesar needed. Pompey, the military whiz with a fan base as large as Caesar's debt, provided the muscle and influence. Together, they formed an unofficial alliance that was equal parts genius and powder keg. You could say it was the Roman version of a buddy comedy, but with higher stakes and more backstabbing. But let's not sugarcoat it. The political scene in Rome was a viper's nest, and Caesar wasn't just playing nice. He was a master of bending the rules, and his consulship was a testament to that. When the Senate played hardball, Caesar simply bypassed them, taking legislation directly to the popular assemblies. It was democracy in action, Roman style, with a hint of my way or the highway. The real kicker here is that, while Caesar was busy reshaping Roman politics, he was also laying the groundwork for his future conquests. By the end of his consulship, he'd secured a governorship in Gaul. This wasn't just any governorship. It was a ticket to military glory and a way to pay off his debts through conquest. Caesar was about to turn his financial woes into a stepping stone to greatness, proving once again that when life gives you lemons, you make lemonade. Or in Caesar's case, you make Gaul your personal playground. Caesar's rise was anything but straightforward. It was a tightrope walk over a pit of vipers, with every step requiring balance, cunning, and a healthy disregard for tradition. And while he may have been up to his neck in debt, he was also neck-deep in ambition. It was this ambition that would propel him from the streets of Rome to the fields of Gaul, setting the stage for one of history's most legendary military campaigns. But that's a story for another night. For now, let's just appreciate the audacity of a man who turned financial woes into a political powerhouse, proving that, in the Game of Thrones, it's not about playing the hand you're dealt, it's about reshuffling the deck entirely. All right, let's pick up the trail where we last left Julius Caesar, standing at the precipice of one of history's most storied military campaigns. His time as consul was like a dress rehearsal for the main act, and the stage was set for the Gallic Wars, a series of conflicts that would cement his legacy as both a military genius and a master of selling his own legend. But before you envision Caesar as some kind of ancient superhero in a crimson cape, let's dial back the drama and dig into the meat of the matter: tactics, troops, and the occasional tactical blunder. When Caesar took on the Gauls, he wasn't just wrestling with a ragtag bunch of barbarians, as Roman propaganda would like you to believe. Oh no, the Gallic tribes were a formidable force, diverse, numerous, and with a knack for unity when it counted. Picture this: Caesar, armed with a brain sharper than a gladius, and about 50 Roman soldiers, set out to subdue a region that probably had more cows than people. It's estimated that Gaul had a population of around 3 million with about 1 million capable warriors. So, Caesar's campaign was less a walk in the park and more of a stroll through a minefield. Now, Caesar's military strategies were the stuff of legends, but they were not without their hiccups. One of his greatest strengths was the ability to adapt. Take the Battle of Bibracte in 58 BCE, for instance. Caesar, facing the Helvetii, a migrating tribe, decided that a head-on confrontation was the best way to show who was boss. He deployed his forces on a hill, maximizing the high ground advantage, classic tactical brilliance. But when skirmishes got dicey, Caesar's quick thinking led to a tactical withdrawal that turned into a decisive victory. And just like that, the Helvetii were sent packing, and Caesar's stock in Rome rose faster than a loaf of bread in a Roman bakery. But not all battles were as straightforward. Fast forward to the siege of Alesia in 52 BCE, where Caesar faced Vercingetorix, the Gallic king whose name alone sounds like a spell from a fantasy novel. This battle was a logistical nightmare. Caesar was outnumbered, his 60,000 troops against not only the 80,000 inside Alesia, but also a relief force of potentially 100,000 Gauls. Caesar's solution: build a double ring of fortifications around Alesia, effectively putting the Gallic forces in a two-layered sandwich. It was an audacious move, one that could have ended in disaster had the Roman army run out of supplies, or if the Gallic reinforcements had broken through. But Caesar's sheer audacity and his soldiers' tenacity won the day, and Vercingetorix had to surrender. Talk about a full-circle moment, literally. Of course, no discussion of Caesar's campaigns would be complete without a nod to his legendary phrase, Veni, Vidi, Vici, which translates to I came, I saw, I conquered. Sounds like the ultimate mic drop, right? The phrase supposedly came after the Battle of Zela in 47 BCE, but here's the kicker. It was a relatively minor skirmish against Farnes's Roman II of Pontus. Caesar's PR spin turned it into a hallmark of his military prowess. In reality, the battle was over so quickly it was almost a footnote in the grand saga of his campaigns. But Caesar knew the power of a catchy slogan. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of going viral. Let's not forget the economic motivations behind these campaigns, either. Gaul wasn't just a military target. It was a treasure trove of resources. The spoils of war were a necessary part of Caesar's plan to pay off his debts and fund his political ambitions. Subjugating the tribes meant more than personal glory. It meant plunder, slaves, and territory, which translated into cold, hard sesterces. By the end of the Gallic Wars, Caesar had not only expanded Rome's territory dramatically, but had also filled his coffers with enough wealth to rival Crassus himself. So, did Caesar make mistakes? Absolutely. His underestimation of the Gallic penchant for guerrilla tactics led to more than one close call. There were times when his forces were stretched thin, and supply lines were as tangled as a Roman toga in a windstorm, but his ability to turn potential disasters into victories was uncanny. He was like a master chess player who sometimes lost a pawn but never lost sight of the end game. In the grand tapestry of history, Caesar's Gallic wars are often painted with broad strokes of glory and conquest. Yet behind this heroic canvas lies a more nuanced picture, one of strategic gambles, economic necessity, and a touch of theatrical flair. So, while Veni, Vidi, Vici may echo through the corridors of time like a victorious trumpet, remember that it's just one note in a symphony of both triumph and trial. Stay tuned, because the saga of Julius Caesar is far from over. We've got more ground to cover, more myths to bust, and plenty of Roman drama to unravel. So, keep your sandals on. This historical journey is just getting started. As we continue our whirlwind tour of Julius Caesar's life, let's pivot back to the bustling streets of Rome, where political intrigue was as common as olive oil, and backstabbing was practically a competitive sport. While Caesar was off gallivanting through Gaul, Rome wasn't exactly hitting the pause button. Nope, it was a hotbed of power struggles, alliances, and betrayals that would make any soap opera look like a children's bedtime story. First up in the political marsh pit, we have Pompey the Great. Now, Pompey wasn't just sitting on his laurels back in Rome, while Caesar was busy adding new territories to the Roman map. He was a seasoned military leader with his own impressive list of conquests. In terms of power, Pompey was like Caesar's shadow, always looming, never quite matching Caesar's flamboyance, but definitely a force to be reckoned with. But here's the kicker. Pompey and Caesar were supposed to be allies, remember. They were part of that cozy little arrangement known as the First Triumvirate, along with Crassus. But with Crassus meeting an unfortunate end in Parthia in 53 BCE, the triumvirate was down a man, and all bets were off. The political landscape was shifting faster than sand dunes in a desert storm, and the Senate was more divided than ever. The Optimates, Rome's conservative faction, saw Caesar's rising power as a direct threat to their own influence. Meanwhile, the Populares, who were more about the people, or at least liked to think so, were Caesar's biggest fans. The tug-of-war for power was intense, and Caesar was not about to let his hard-earned reputation and influence slip through his fingers. Enter Caesar's secret weapon, propaganda. While today's politicians might rely on Twitter and Instagram, Caesar had his own first-century version of social media, the Commentarii de Bello Gallico. These were more than just dry accounts of military campaigns. They were carefully crafted narratives that painted Caesar as the hero of Rome, the man who brought civilization to the barbarian Gauls. Think of it as the ancient world's equivalent of a best-selling autobiography, part history, part self-promotion, and all about spinning a narrative that showed Caesar in the best possible light. But Caesar's charm offensive wasn't just about words on papyrus. He was also acutely aware of the economic stakes. His conquests in Gaul weren't just military victories. They were economic windfalls. The spoils of war, gold, slaves, and resources flowed back to Rome, filling the coffers and easing the Republic's financial woes. You could say that Caesar's campaigns helped bankroll Rome's lavish lifestyle, funding everything from public games to major construction projects. In a way, Rome was like a startup that had finally hit its series of funding round, thanks to Caesar's relentless expansion. All the while, tensions between Caesar and Pompey were simmering. Their alliance was becoming more of a frenemy situation, with both sides eyeing each other like rival CEOs in a corporate boardroom. Pompey, now married to Caesar's daughter Julia, found himself in a tricky position. His personal ties to Caesar were being stretched thin by political pressures, and when Julia died in childbirth, any hope of familial reconciliation vanished faster than a free toga at a Roman market. With the personal bond between Caesar and Pompey severed, the Senate saw an opportunity. They began to align with Pompey, offering him command of the armies in Italy. It was a clever move, setting Pompey up as the defender of the Republic while painting Caesar as the power-hungry outsider. The stage was set for an epic showdown, and Rome was the arena. Now, let's not forget Crassus, the third wheel of the original triumvirate. His death in 53 BCE during a disastrous campaign against the Parthians left a power vacuum that only accelerated the rift between Caesar and Pompey. Without Crassus to mediate, the balance of power shifted dramatically. It was like a three-legged stool losing one of its legs. Suddenly, everything was off-kilter. As the political drama unfolded, Caesar continued to expand his influence in Gaul. His victories were not just military triumphs, but also strategic plays in the ongoing chess match with Pompey and the Senate. Each battle won was a message to his rivals, a reminder that Caesar was not to be underestimated. The Senate, wary of Caesar's growing power, demanded he disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen. It was a thinly veiled attempt to strip him of his authority, but Caesar was not one to be easily cowed. With his political instincts sharper than a centurion's sword, Caesar knew he needed a dramatic move to seize the upper hand. And so, in 49 BCE, he made the fateful decision to cross the Rubicon River with his army, an act of war that would plunge Rome into civil strife. Legend has it that as he crossed, he uttered the now famous phrase, "Alia iacta est," the die is cast. It was a point of no return, a bold gamble that would either cement his legacy or lead to his downfall. Back in Rome, the impact of Caesar's campaigns was being felt in every corner of the Republic. The influx of wealth from Gaul had a profound economic impact, stabilizing the currency and boosting trade. The Roman treasury, once as depleted as a soldier's wine ration after a long campaign, was now flush with funds. Caesar's military successes had turned Rome into an economic powerhouse, but it also widened the gap between the elite and the common citizens. The rich got richer, and the poor, well, they got to watch the games. Meanwhile, the Senate was in disarray, struggling to maintain control in the face of Caesar's growing popularity. Pompey, now the Senate's champion, found himself in a precarious position. He had the support of the Roman establishment, but Caesar had the loyalty of the legions and the adoration of the masses. It was a classic case of establishment versus populism, with each side believing it had the moral high ground. As Caesar marched towards Rome, the city braced itself for the inevitable clash. The political machinations, the power plays, and the betrayals had all led to this moment. In the grand narrative of Roman history, Caesar's crossing of the Rubicon was a turning point, a bold stroke that would forever alter the course of the Republic. Yet, as much as Caesar's legend was built on his military prowess and political savvy, it was his understanding of the power of narrative and economics that truly set him apart. He wasn't just a soldier or a statesman. He was a master strategist who knew how to play the game and rewrite the rules at the same time. As we look back on this chapter of history, it's important to remember that Caesar's story is both a tale of ambition and a cautionary saga of how power can be both a boon and a burden. Stay tuned as we delve further into the saga of Julius Caesar, exploring the dramatic events that followed his bold crossing of the Rubicon. The stakes have never been higher, and the drama is just beginning to unfold. Keep those gladiatorial helmets on. This historical epic is far from over. As Caesar and his legions marched southward, the weight of his audacious decision to cross the Rubicon echoed not just through the narrow Italian valleys, but throughout Roman history. The Rubicon wasn't just a shallow river in northern Italy. It was a boundary between the provinces and the heart of the Republic. Crossing it with an army was tantamount to declaring war on Rome itself. For Caesar, it was do or die, but let's not sugarcoat it. He had the dice loaded. This was no reckless gamble. It was a calculated risk by a man who'd made a career of turning the tides of fate. Now, let's unpack the myth of Caesar's leadership style. Was he the charismatic leader whose very presence could rally troops to charge into the jaws of death? Or was he a disciplinarian, ruling with an iron fist and a sharp tongue? The truth is, Caesar was both, and sometimes neither, depending on what the situation demanded. Take the Battle of Pharsalus in 48 BCE. Here we see Caesar, outnumbered and seemingly outmaneuvered by Pompey's forces, facing what looked like an inevitable defeat. Pompey had about 45,000 troops to Caesar's 22,000. Yet, Caesar's genius wasn't just in battlefield tactics. It was in understanding human psychology. Knowing his men were exhausted and demoralized, he delivered a speech that was as much about glory as it was about survival. His words lit a fire under his soldiers, transforming a potential rout into a decisive victory. He struck at Pompey's cavalry with unexpected ferocity, turning the tide and sending his enemy into retreat. It was a masterclass in charisma. Caesar wasn't just rallying his men. He was selling them a vision of victory, one they couldn't resist buying into. But let's not ignore the role of discipline in Caesar's success. His legions were known for their rigorous training and unwavering loyalty. This wasn't by accident. Caesar was a stickler for order, and his ability to maintain discipline was key to his military prowess. His soldiers weren't just fighting for Rome. They were fighting for Caesar, a leader who led from the front and shared in their hardships. Yet, let's not romanticize it too much. Discipline in Caesar's army was often brutal. Desertion and mutiny were met with harsh punishments, sometimes as severe as decimation, where every 10th man in a rebellious unit was executed. Talk about a morale boost, if you're into that sort of thing. Now, about those moments of sheer luck that pepper Caesar's career like a Roman feast with too much garum. Remember the siege of Alesia? Sure, Caesar's strategy was audacious, but he was also incredibly lucky. If the Gauls' relief force had broken through, or if supplies had run out, Caesar's grand plan might have crumbled faster than a stale loaf of Roman bread. Luck also played a part during the Battle of Dyrrhachium. Caesar's forces were nearly routed by Pompey, and only a fortuitous series of events, including the missteps of Pompey's commanders, saved him from disaster. It was a narrow escape that could have easily ended his ambitions for good. Speaking of near disasters, let's not forget the Alexandrian War. After pursuing Pompey to Egypt, Caesar found himself embroiled in a local conflict that nearly resulted in his capture. Alexandria in 48 BCE was less a vacation spot and more a boiling cauldron of political chaos. Caesar's involvement was partly by choice. He was intrigued by the allure of Cleopatra, but it was also a quagmire of his own making. Trapped in the city, Caesar faced a siege that put his legendary composure to the test. The escape plan involved setting fire to the Egyptian fleet, a move that, while brilliant, also led to the partial destruction of the great library of Alexandria. Whoops, Caesar may have been a strategic mastermind, but let's just say his collateral damage record wasn't spotless. But what made Caesar a legend wasn't just his victories or his ability to skirt disaster. It was his flair for storytelling. His account of the Gallic Wars, the Commentarii de Bello Gallico, wasn't just a military diary. It was a narrative masterpiece. Written in the third person, it painted Caesar as a hero in his own saga, a tactician without peer. Yet much of this was PR on steroids. The text glossed over setbacks and amplified successes, crafting a legacy that would endure beyond his conquests. The reality was often messier, rife with setbacks and moral ambiguities that don't quite fit the heroic mold. Economics, too, played a crucial role in Caesar's leadership. The spoils of war weren't just trophies. They were essential to maintaining his power. The wealth flowing back to Rome from his campaigns allowed Caesar to pay his soldiers well, ensuring their loyalty. It also funded public works and games that kept the Roman populace entertained and supportive. Caesar understood that a happy public was less likely to question his unchecked power. It's not so different from a modern politician promising tax cuts and job creation. Keep the people satisfied, and they'll overlook a lot. Now, while the legend of Caesar often focuses on his military genius and political acumen, it's crucial to remember the economic engine that powered his ambitions. His campaigns were as much about filling coffers as they were about expanding borders. The wealth from Gaul didn't just pad Caesar's personal fortune. It funded Rome's infrastructure and public spectacles, cementing his popularity. Yet, this economic boon came at a cost. The influx of slaves from his conquests disrupted local economies, creating tensions that simmered beneath the surface of Roman society. As we explore the dichotomy of Caesar's leadership, his charisma and discipline, his luck and strategy, it's clear that the line between myth and reality is as blurred as a Roman fresco. Caesar wasn't just a hero or a villain. He was a complex figure navigating a world as ruthless as any Shakespearean drama. His story is a reminder that history often elevates its characters to mythic status, obscuring the gritty realities in favor of a more palatable narrative. But behind every legend, there's always a man, or in Caesar's case, a leader who knew how to seize the moment, spin the story, and leave a legacy that, for better or worse, has endured for millennia. As we draw this chapter to a close, keep in mind that Caesar's journey is far from over. The crossing of the Rubicon was just the beginning of a saga that would reshape Rome and the world. Stay tuned as we delve into the seismic shifts that followed and the legacy of a man who defied the odds, sometimes by luck, often by design, and always with an eye on the prize. The story of Julius Caesar isn't just history. It's a timeless tale of ambition, strategy, and the human condition. So, keep your tunics on and your minds open. There's more to come in this epic saga. As we stride into the last act of Julius Caesar's colossal tale, let's not mince words. The guy was a political disruptor with the kind of strategic mind that could turn a chessboard into a battlefield. Yet his legacy is a tangled web of triumph and tragedy, genius and hubris. It's the stuff historical epics are made of, minus the dragons, but with plenty of daggers. First things first, let's talk about Caesar's assassination on the Ides of March, 44 BCE. This wasn't just a random act of violence. It was the culmination of a political drama that had been brewing like a storm cloud over Rome. Picture this. A group of about 60 senators, fearing Caesar's growing power and potential kingship, decided that the best way to preserve the Republic was to make Caesar a permanent fixture in Roman history by eliminating him. Talk about a drastic HR decision. The conspirators included some of Caesar's closest allies, like Brutus and Cassius, men who were once bound by loyalty, but now driven by the fear of autocracy. It's a classic tale of betrayal, but let's not get too misty-eyed about it. Caesar's assassination was less about a noble attempt to save the Republic, and more about power dynamics and personal grievances. The senators were less concerned with democracy and more with their own status and influence. After all, Caesar's reforms, like increasing the Senate size to 900 members, diluted the traditional power held by the Roman elite. He was a populist, appealing to the masses at the expense of the old guard. You might say Caesar was the original disruptor, the Steve Jobs of ancient Rome, shaking up the status quo while wearing a toga instead of a turtleneck. The irony is, Caesar's death didn't save the Republic. Instead, it plunged Rome into another round of civil wars, paving the way for the rise of the Roman Empire. Enter stage left, Octavian, Caesar's grandnephew and adopted heir, later known as Augustus. If you think family reunions are awkward now, imagine being the young upstart with a claim to Caesar's legacy, squaring off against Mark Antony, one of Caesar's top generals and a charismatic leader in his own right. The ensuing power struggle was a political soap opera with enough drama to fill a Colosseum. Octavian was no slouch, though. He was as shrewd as Caesar, if not more so, playing the long game with the patience of a cat watching a pigeon. By 27 BCE, he emerged victorious, marking the end of the Roman Republic and the dawn of the Roman Empire. Augustus would rule for over 40 years, during which he solidified his power and established a system that lasted for centuries. So, in a twist of fate, Caesar's assassination, intended to restore the Republic, instead laid the foundation for imperial rule. Talk about unintended consequences. Now, let's tackle the myth of Caesar's deification. Following his death, Caesar was declared a god by the Senate, a move that was as political as it was religious. Sure, the idea of divine status might make for good poetry, but let's not pretend it wasn't a calculated maneuver. Deifying Caesar served to legitimize Augustus' rule, giving him a divine lineage to flaunt like a Roman designer label. It's a bit like saying, hey, my uncle was a god, so you should definitely let me run the show. The Romans were nothing if not theatrical about their politics. Of course, The notion of Caesar as a god is romantic, but let's be real. The man was very much mortal, with flaws and failings like the rest of us. He was ambitious to a fault, a visionary with a penchant for risk-taking that sometimes bordered on reckless. His deification, while symbolic, was more about political expediency than celestial merit. It's a reminder that history often elevates its figures to mythical status, obscuring the gritty realities in favor of a more palatable narrative. As we mull over Caesar's legacy, it's hard not to draw parallels with modern leaders. Like Caesar, today's political figures are often larger than life, their stories part fact, part fiction. They too navigate the treacherous waters of public opinion, media narratives, and political machinations. And just as in Caesar's time, the line between leader and legend is often blurred, with history's verdict rendered long after the final act. So, how will history remember them? Through Caesar's lens, perhaps, as a blend of charisma and controversy, brilliance and blind spots. His story is a testament to the power of narrative, the allure of ambition, and the inevitable march of change. Caesar played the game with a master's touch, but even he couldn't predict the ripple effects of his actions. If there's one takeaway from Caesar's saga, it's that the legacy you leave is often not the one you intended. In wrapping up this whirlwind tour of Caesar's life, let's tip our laurel wreaths to a man whose ambition reshaped the world, whose strategies confounded his enemies, and whose story continues to captivate us millennia later. Whether as a military genius, a political disruptor, or a cautionary tale of power's seductive pull, Julius Caesar remains an enduring figure in history's grand theatre. And as the curtain falls on this chapter, we're left to ponder the echoes of his legacy in our own time, a reminder that history is as much about interpretation as it is about fact. So, keep your minds sharp and your questions sharper, because history, like Caesar, is never quite finished with us. Isaac Newton entered the world in 1642, a year that was both tumultuous and pivotal, marked by the English Civil War. If you think the times we live in are chaotic, imagine trying to invent calculus while the world around you is literally imploding. Newton was born prematurely on Christmas Day in Woolsthorpe, Lincolnshire. His birth was so early that he was described as being small enough to fit inside a quart mug. Talk about an underdog story, right? Newton's early life was not exactly a fairy tale. His father, also named Isaac, died 3 months before he was born. This left the family in a bit of a financial pickle. His mother, Hannah Icecoff, remarried when Newton was 3, and off she went to live with her new husband, leaving young Isaac with his maternal grandparents. Not exactly the warm, fuzzy family dynamic you'd hope for. But hey, who needs emotional stability when you have the universe to unravel? The family farm, which Newton was supposed to manage, wasn't exactly a fortune generator. Instead of tilling the land, young Isaac was more interested in tinkering with gadgets and devising contraptions. His early experiments included building miniature windmills and sundials. While his peers were off learning to plough, Newton was busy figuring out how to measure time. Clearly, he was a kid with priorities. Fast forward to 1655, and we find Newton at the King's School in Grantham. Here, his academic prowess began to shine. He lodged with an apothecary named Clark, where he reportedly spent more time concocting potions and studying than socializing with the other kids. A classic sign of a future scientist, more interested in chemistry sets than in kickabouts. In 1661, Newton made his way to Trinity College, Cambridge, the Hogwarts of scientific minds at the time. Now, don't picture ivy-clad serenity. Picture instead a place where the curriculum was still heavily focused on Aristotle. Newton, however, was not about to let a little thing like the outdated teachings of a long-dead philosopher stand in his way. He devoured works by more contemporary thinkers like Descartes, Galileo, and Kepler, and began to form his own revolutionary ideas. It was during the 1660 that the infamous apple incident took place. Let's chew on this myth for a moment. While it's a charming tale that an apple bonked Newton on the head, leading to his theory of gravity, the reality is a bit less slapstick. Newton himself mentioned seeing an apple fall as he pondered why everything always fell straight down. No head injuries were reported, but the story does make for a better cartoon. Now, Newton was also famously absent-minded. He once got so engrossed in his experiments that he forgot to eat, and was found by a friend half-starved. Another time, he reportedly shoved his own finger into his eye socket just to observe the effects of pressure on vision. You know, for science. This level of dedication, or perhaps distraction, was indicative of his intense focus, which bordered on obsession. Social skills, not exactly his strong suit. Newton was known for being a bit prickly and reclusive. He was more comfortable with numbers and equations than with people. His letters often reveal a man who could be curt and impatient. It's like he was perpetually stuck in a group project with people who didn't quite get it. Despite these quirks, or perhaps because of them, Newton's time at Cambridge laid the groundwork for his future achievements. He would go on to redefine physics, mathematics, and even our understanding of the universe. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. For now, young Isaac was just a student with an insatiable curiosity, a penchant for solitude, and an uncanny ability to see the world in ways no one else could. So there you have it, the early life of Isaac Newton, where economic struggles, academic brilliance, and the occasional social faux pas set the stage for one of history's greatest minds, who knew that a kid born too small to survive would grow up to change the way we comprehend the cosmos. It's a reminder that sometimes the most unassuming beginnings lead to the most extraordinary journeys. So, with young Isaac Newton having laid the groundwork for his intellectual conquest of the universe, it's time to fast forward to the late 1660 and early 1670, a period when Newton began crafting the intellectual tools that would redefine the cosmos. Imagine this. Newton is holed up in his room at Cambridge, surrounded by stacks of papers, quills, and the occasional apple. No, not falling from the sky this time. It's here that he begins to develop calculus, a nugget of mathematical brilliance that will go on to drive students to tears for centuries to come. Now, while we love to romanticize the image of the lone genius, the truth is that Newton's journey into the mathematical unknown wasn't entirely solitary. Enter the spotlight Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, a German polymath with a penchant for calculus of his own. Here's where the plot thickens. Both Newton and Leibniz developed calculus independently, but the question of who got there first sparked a transcontinental intellectual brawl that makes today's social media spats look like playground tiffs. Newton claimed he had the idea as early as 1666, but he didn't publish his findings until 1693, like a chef keeping his best recipe secret. Leibniz, on the other hand, published his work in 1684, beating Newton to the punch in the public eye. The ensuing feud was as petty as it was fierce, with accusations of plagiarism flying faster than Newton's imaginary apples. Newton, true to form, was not one to let bygones be bygones. He leveraged his position as president of the Royal Society to orchestrate a rather biased investigation, which unsurprisingly favored his claims. Think of it as the 17th century version of stacking the jury. In the realm of physics, Newton was also hard at work. He concocted his 3 laws of motion, which are the intellectual equivalent of a blockbuster trilogy, each installment more groundbreaking than the last. The first law, the law of inertia, states that an object at rest stays at rest, and an object in motion stays in motion unless acted upon by a force. Sounds simple enough, but it was a game changer. No more Aristotle with his idea that objects in motion naturally slow down. Newton was tearing down outdated notions like an intellectual wrecking ball. The second law introduces us to the concept of force, with the famous equation F equals ma, force equals mass times acceleration. This was Newton's way of saying, hey, here's how you actually calculate how much oomph it takes to get something moving. The third law, equally iconic, states that for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. And just like that, Newton handed humanity the keys to understanding how everything from rolling balls to the orbits of planets actually worked. But wait, there's more. Newton wasn't just fiddling with math and motion. He was also busy engaging in what can best be described as a classic academic cage match with none other than Robert Hooke. Hooke, a man who could match Newton's genius with his own brand of brilliance, was known for his work on elasticity, the law of Hooke, not quite as catchy as Newton's laws, but still important. The two were like intellectual boxers, duking it out over the nature of light and color. Hooke had his own ideas about optics, which Newton, ever the contrarian, was keen to disprove. In 1672, Newton presented his theory on light and colour to the Royal Society, positing that white light was composed of a spectrum of colours. Hooke, never one to back down from a challenge, critiqued Newton's work, prompting a flurry of letters that were as polite as a modern-day Twitter feud. Newton, with his signature charm, responded with a mixture of disdain and dismissal. The tension was palpable, and the rivalry was so heated that when Hooke died in 1703, Newton allegedly ensured that no portrait of Hooke survived. Talk about holding a grudge. These intellectual squabbles, while petty, were also the crucible in which modern science was forged. Newton's work laid the foundation for classical mechanics, and his laws of motion were instrumental in everything from launching rockets to solving the mystery of the tides. His development of calculus provided the mathematical tools necessary for future generations to build upon his work, even if the calculus controversy lingers in the annals of history like a stubborn stain. In the end, Newton's revolutionary work in mathematics and physics wasn't just about the equations and laws he devised. It was a testament to his relentless curiosity and unyielding pursuit of knowledge. Despite the feuds and the occasional bout of pettiness, his contributions remain a cornerstone of scientific understanding. The saga of Newton and his contemporaries reveals a time when intellectual giants clashed and collaborated, driven by a shared obsession to unravel the mysteries of the universe. The tale of Newton's genius is far from over, but for now, we've seen how one man's singular vision could alter the course of history, even if it meant stepping on a few toes along the way. As we dive into the next chapter of Isaac Newton's storied life, let's trade the celestial for the terrestrial and plop Newton into the gritty, money-scented world of the Royal Mint. It's 1696, and Newton, that perennial overachiever, decided to swap apples and optics for the slightly more tangible world of coins and counterfeiters. Why? Well, blame it on the times. England's economy was in turmoil, teetering on the edge of financial chaos, thanks to a currency debacle that would make even the most hardened economist break into a cold sweat. Picture this: a country suffering from rampant counterfeiting, where up to 1 in 10 coins in circulation was a fake. The economy was like a leaky boat, and Newton was called in to patch the holes. Enter Newton, the accidental crime fighter. Yes, our reclusive mathematician was now tasked with the decidedly less glamorous job of master of the mint. His mission: to reform England's currency and bring counterfeiters to justice. It's like asking a Nobel laureate to moonlight as a detective, a role he unexpectedly excelled at. Newton wasn't just sitting in an office, shuffling papers like some bureaucratic bystander. Oh no, he was out there, sleeves rolled up, personally investigating the criminal underworld. He approached the job with the same intensity he'd brought to his scientific pursuits. Imagine his lab as a crime scene investigation unit, complete with Newton dusting coins for fingerprints. Metaphorically, of course. In reality, he was poring over mint records, tracking down those pesky counterfeiters with the determination of a bloodhound. And let's talk economic context. Late 17th century, England was a place where economic woes kept everyone on their toes. The Great Recoinage of 1696 was a desperate attempt to stabilize the currency, with Newton at the helm steering the ship through choppy waters. The government decided to recall and remint all the silver coins, a Herculean task that required precision and patience. Newton, with his penchant for detail, was the perfect fit. He was like a one-man quality control department, ensuring that the new coins were as tamper-proof as possible. The man who once redefined gravity was now redefining gravity's worth in silver. But let's not sugarcoat this. Newton was ruthless. He had over 100 counterfeiters prosecuted, and many of them met a grisly end at the gallows. One of his most famous adversaries was the notorious William Challoner, a master counterfeiter who was as slippery as he was skilled. Challoner had been a thorn in the side of the mint for years, boasting about his exploits, and even attempting to infiltrate the mint under the guise of an informant. But Newton was no fool. He meticulously gathered evidence, orchestrating a courtroom drama that would have made Shakespeare proud. Challoner was convicted and hanged in 1699, a testament to Newton's relentless pursuit of justice, or perhaps just his intolerance for nonsense. Yet, in this unlikely role, Newton's genius shone in unexpected ways. He introduced the practice of milling the edges of coins to prevent clipping, a common practice where silver was shaved off the edges of coins to be melted down and sold. This innovation was as much a stroke of genius as anything he'd done with calculus. Who knew that the same mind that could calculate the forces between planets could also outsmart petty criminals? And here's the kicker. Newton wasn't doing this for fame or fortune, though the job did pay handsomely. He saw it as a public service, a way to bring order to chaos. It's as if Sherlock Holmes traded his deerstalker for a powdered wig, solving financial crimes with a side of mathematical rigor. The irony of a man who spent his life unraveling the mysteries of the universe, now unraveling the mysteries of coin fraud, is not lost on us. It's a reminder that even the greatest minds sometimes find themselves in the most unexpected places, doing the most unexpected things. So, as Newton battled counterfeiters by day and continued his scientific endeavors by night, he embodied the very essence of a parlomath. He was a man who straddled worlds that seemed, at first glance, unrelated, and yet, in both, he left an indelible mark. His time at the Royal Mint wasn't just a footnote in his career. It was a testament to his versatility, to his ability to apply his intellect to whatever task lay before him, no matter how mundane or dangerous. As we leave Newton in the bustling heart of the Royal Mint, plotting his next move against the criminal underworld, we're reminded of the curious journey that brought him here. From a tiny, premature baby in Woolsthorpe to the halls of Cambridge, and now the Mint's marble corridors, Newton was a man of many contradictions and even more talents. And while his time as a financial enforcer was but a chapter in his life, it was a chapter that showcased the breadth of his genius in ways we might never have expected. With Newton, the story is never quite what it seems, and there's always another twist waiting just around the corner. So, as Newton plotted his next move against the criminal underworld from the marble corridors of the Royal Mint, let's pivot from coins and criminals to something a bit more esoteric, into the world of alchemy and mysticism, where Newton, the scientific heavyweight, spent a surprising amount of time chasing the elusive dream of turning lead into gold. Yes, the same man who grounded physics in rationality was also elbow-deep in the arcane arts. Imagine swapping lab coats for wizard robes, though Newton probably kept his powdered wig. But why, you ask, would a man who could unlock the secrets of the universe bother with alchemy? Well, back in the late 17th century, alchemy was less Hogwarts fantasy and more a blend of chemistry, philosophy, and a dash of magic. It was like the Renaissance version of a STEM major, except with fewer job prospects and more mystical stones. Newton wasn't alone in this pursuit. Alchemy was all the rage among intellectuals of the time. The philosopher's stone, a mythical substance said to turn base metals into gold and grant immortality, was the holy grail of the alchemical world. And Newton, never one to shy away from a challenge, devoted a chunk of his life to this quest. Reports suggest he wrote around 1 million words on alchemy, more than he penned on physics and mathematics combined. That's some serious dedication to the magical arts. Now, before we dismiss this as mere folly, let's dig deeper. Alchemy wasn't just about gold and eternal life. It was also a philosophical and spiritual journey. Newton saw it as a path to understanding the divine blueprint of creation. In his mind, the cosmos was a grand puzzle, and alchemy was just another piece, one that could perhaps unlock the secrets of existence itself. Forget the apple, now we're talking cosmic mysteries. But Newton's alchemical adventures weren't just about mixing potions. They were deeply intertwined with his religious beliefs, which were, shall we say, unconventional. Newton spent years delving into the Bible, not just for spiritual guidance, but for cryptographic insights. He believed the holy text contained hidden messages about the universe, history, and even the apocalypse. Forget Sunday sermons. Newton was conducting a cosmic treasure hunt. He calculated that the world would end in 2060, a date he arrived at by combining biblical prophecies with his own interpretation of historical events. Talk about a doomsday prediction with a scientific twist. Newton wasn't just reading the Bible. He was decoding it, looking for patterns that would reveal the divine plan. It's as if Dan Brown and Stephen Hawking teamed up for a cosmic whodunit. And yet, despite these mystical endeavors, let's not lose sight of the broader picture. Newton's forays into alchemy and biblical calculations reveal a man who was as much a product of his time as he was ahead of it. The 17th century was an era of exploration, both geographic and intellectual. The boundaries between science, magic, and religion were blurred, and Newton, ever the curious mind, straddled them all. It's tempting to romanticize Newton as a purely rational scientist, but his life was a tapestry woven with threads of mysticism and magic. He was an enigma wrapped in an apple, a man who saw no contradiction in seeking both scientific truth and mystical understanding. It's like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube with one hand while reading a map of Middle-earth with the other. Yet, for all his brilliance, Newton wasn't infallible. His alchemical experiments didn't yield gold or immortality, just a lot of notes and some rather caustic chemical burns, if the rumors are true. But his failures in alchemy didn't diminish his scientific achievements. Instead, they highlight the restless curiosity that drove him to explore every avenue of knowledge, no matter how unconventional. So here we are, in the midst of Newton's alchemical odyssey, a journey that's as much about the man himself as it is about the elusive philosopher's stone. It's a reminder that even the greatest minds are prone to flights of fancy, driven by dreams that defy the boundaries of logic and reason. In Newton's world, science and magic danced a delicate waltz, each step revealing a little more of the universe's grand design. As we leave Newton in his alchemical laboratory, pondering the mysteries of both heaven and earth, we're left with a portrait of a man who was as complex as the equations he devised. His life was a paradox, a blend of rationality and mysticism, a quest for truth that knew no bounds. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the enigma of Isaac Newton, a man who defied definition and dared to dream beyond the stars. The story's not over yet, and if history's taught us anything, it's that with Newton, there's always more than meets the eye. Newton's life, like a kaleidoscope, was a dazzling swirl of colors, all shifting with each turn of his mind. But as we pivot from his mystical pursuits, we find ourselves back in the realm of hard science, where Newton's legacy truly shines. You see, Newton didn't just toss an apple into the annals of history. He hurled a cosmic curveball that changed the way we perceive the universe. His Principia Mathematica, published in 1687, isn't just a book. It was a seismic shift in how humanity understood the cosmos. Imagine the impact of a blockbuster movie, but for science nerds. Its pages contain the laws of motion and universal gravitation, written with the precision of a master clockmaker who'd finally figured out how the whole contraption worked. But let's not get too starry-eyed. Newton's genius, while unparalleled, came wrapped in a rather prickly package. He was known for being notoriously difficult, with a social charm that made porcupines seem cuddly. His intellectual sparring with contemporaries was legendary, like a never-ending episode of the real scientists of 17th century Europe. Yet, despite his personal quirks, or maybe because of them, Newton's work transcended the mundane squabbles of his time. His gravitational theory not only explained why apples fall, but also why the moon doesn't just float away like a lost balloon. Now, here's where the myth and reality tango. We like to think of Newton as the solitary genius, pondering the universe in splendid isolation. But the truth is, science is a team sport, even if Newton liked to play solo. Yes, he stood on the shoulders of giants, Kepler, Galileo, Descartes, and while he may not have sent them thank you notes, he certainly built upon their work. His ability to synthesize their ideas into a unified theory of gravity was nothing short of revolutionary. It was like turning a jigsaw puzzle into a clear picture, one where every piece fit perfectly. The economic and cultural ripple effects of Newton's discoveries were profound. His laws of motion became the backbone of classical mechanics, driving the industrial revolution that transformed societies and economies with all the subtlety of a freight train. Factories sprouted like weeds, steam engines chugged along with Newtonian precision, and the world, for better or worse, was never the same. Even today, as we launch satellites and rovers into the far reaches of space, we're still riding the wave of Newton's insights, like cosmic surfers catching the perfect gravitational wave. But let's not forget the man behind the myth. Newton, in all his brilliance, was also deeply human, flawed, complex, and occasionally baffling. His penchant for privacy and his reluctance to publish were legendary. He wrote and rewrote the Principia for years, like an artist haunted by the spectre of perfection. Yet when he did publish, it was with a force that left an indelible mark on science and culture. And speaking of marks, Newton's influence extended far beyond the lab and into the very fabric of society. His work laid the groundwork for the Enlightenment, a period where reason and science began to light the way out of the shadowy corridors of superstition. Newton became a symbol of the power of human intellect, his name synonymous with the triumph of reason over ignorance. Schools and universities adopted his methods, and his ideas permeated the very essence of modern education. Yet the myths persist, clinging like barnacles to the hull of history. The apple story, while charming, oversimplifies a lifetime of relentless inquiry, and the image of Newton as a lone genius overlooks the vibrant intellectual community that surrounded him, one that was as competitive as it was collaborative. History, that crafty storyteller, often prefers the highlights, the neat, tidy narratives that fit conveniently into textbooks. But the real story, the one layered with complexity and contradiction, is far more compelling. In the end, Newton's legacy is a testament to the dual nature of human endeavor, a blend of brilliance and eccentricity, logic and mystery. He was a man who dared to dream beyond the limits of his time, even as he wrestled with the mundane realities of life. Newton's journey from a small Lincolnshire village to the pinnacle of scientific achievement is not just a story of individual genius, but also a reflection of humanity's unyielding quest for understanding. So, as we close the chapter on Isaac Newton, let's do so with a wry smile and an acknowledgement of the quirks and contradictions that make him such a fascinating figure. History, after all, is not just a record of what happened, but a tapestry of stories that reveal the depths of human nature. Newton's tale reminds us that even the most towering figures are, at their core, human, driven by curiosity, fraught with imperfections, and immortalized by their contributions to the world. And with that, we tip our hats to Sir Isaac Newton, a man who, in his pursuit of knowledge, gave us a universe to explore and a legacy to ponder. You're standing in the middle of a bustling Celtic feast, and let me tell you, it's nothing like that medieval dinner theatre you once visited. Forget turkey legs and tankards of ale. This is a banquet of epic proportions, where the menu could easily make a modern foodie run for the hills. Welcome to the grand spectacle of Celtic dining, where the hospitality is as boundless as the myths. And trust me, those are about as inflated as a Roman emperor's ego. Now, before we dive into the details of what exactly is on your plate, or rather, what you're trying to avoid, let's set the record straight. The ancient Celts were known for their communal feasting. We're talking gatherings that could dwarf your family's Thanksgiving dinner. These were social events, political platforms, and sometimes a good excuse for a bit of competitive boasting. Think the ancient version of a TED talk, but with more mead and far fewer slideshows. Archaeological digs have uncovered banquet halls that could seat over 100 people. Imagine the noise, the chaos, the arguments over who brought the best fermented beverage. And speaking of beverages, there's this enduring myth about the Celts drowning themselves in endless rivers of ale. Sure, they loved their drink, but let's not get carried away. The Romans, who documented a lot of what we know about the Celts, had a flair for embellishment. So, the next time someone tells you the Celts were swimming in ale, remember, the Romans also thought Nero fiddled while Rome burned. Spoiler alert, violins weren't even invented yet. Let's turn our gaze to the table, or the lack thereof. The Celts weren't about stuffy dining etiquette. Forget plates and utensils. You're more likely to be handed a chunk of meat and a dagger. It's a bit like that time you tried eating a steak with chopsticks, an adventure in its own right. The menu was a smorgasbord of meats, venison, wild boar, and a few things that might make you reconsider your adventurous spirit. Ever tried porpoise? No. Well, you're in for a treat, or a trick. The Celts hunted and ate what was available, and sometimes that meant making do with whatever wandered into their territory. Their legendary banquets were more than just about filling bellies. These feasts were political arenas where alliances were forged, disputes settled, and status flaunted. Hosting a successful feast could elevate a chieftain's status faster than a viral TikTok dance. And just like today, people loved a good story. The more outlandish, the better. So, if you hear tales of Celts roasting whole deer, take it with a grain of salt, or perhaps a pinch of hyperbole. But let's get real for a moment. The Celts were also practical. They were farmers, after all, and their feasts revolved around the agricultural calendar. Harvest time was prime time for a feast, celebrating the bounty of the season and ensuring that everyone had enough to survive the winter. This wasn't just a party, it was a ritual of survival, an insurance policy against the whims of nature. Now, about those Roman accounts. The Romans, bless their overly dramatic hearts, loved to paint the Celts as the ultimate barbarians. To them, Celtic feasts were wild, unruly affairs, more akin to a rock concert than a refined dinner party. But the Romans had a vested interest in portraying the Celts this way. It justified their conquests, the need to civilize these savages. So, whenever you read about Celtic feasting in Roman texts, remember, this is history with a side of propaganda, best consumed with a healthy dose of skepticism. And speaking of skepticism, let's address the elephant in the room, or rather, the boar on the spit. There's a peculiar story about the Celts that involves human sacrifice at these banquets. Now, human sacrifice did occur in Celtic culture, but not every feast turned into a scene from a horror movie. Those tales are more about Roman sensationalism than reality. It's the ancient equivalent of a tabloid headline screaming about alien abductions. So here you are, at a Celtic feast. The air is thick with the smell of roasting meat, the sounds of laughter and debate, and the occasional outburst of song. This isn't just a meal, it's a tapestry of traditions, a celebration of both the mundane and the mythical. It's where the stories of a people are told and retold, each time with a little more flair. And you, my friend, are not just a spectator, but part of a living history that defies simple explanation. As the night wears on, and you find yourself clutching yet another mug of mead, you might ponder the reality behind the legends. The Celts were more than their feasts, more than the sum of Roman exaggerations. They were a complex society with their own unique customs and a way of life that still fascinates us today. And as you raise your mug to join in yet another toast, remember that you're participating in a tradition that's as much about community as it is about consumption. Cheers to that. And speaking of toasts, let's raise a glass, or a horn, if we're sticking with the Celtic theme, to the rituals and ceremonies that would have made the Celts' neighbors do a double take. You see, while feasting was the social glue that held Celtic society together, their rituals and ceremonies were something else entirely. Picture this, a blend of nature worship, mysterious ceremonies, and yes, some rather grim practices that have been sensationalized more than a celebrity divorce. First, let's address the elephant in the room, or should I say, the druid in the grove. The druids were the priestly class in Celtic society, and if you're imagining Gandalf types with flowing robes and long beards, you're not entirely wrong. They were the keepers of knowledge, the judges, and the spiritual leaders. But before we start picturing them as mystical wizards, let's ground this in reality. The druids were less about casting spells and more about maintaining the social and religious order. They were walking encyclopedias in a pre-literate society. Imagine being Google before Google was a thing, quite the gig, right? Now, about those infamous human sacrifices. Yes, they happened, but were they a daily occurrence? Not quite. Archaeological evidence suggests that sacrifices were more of a rare, solemn affair, not a casual weekend pastime. It wasn't like they were sacrificing every Tom, Dick, and Harry just for kicks. These sacrifices were likely tied to significant events or dire needs, like ensuring a good harvest or averting a disaster. And while the Romans loved to depict these rites as barbaric, let's not forget they were no strangers to brutal spectacles themselves. Gladiatorial games, anyone. The Celts' relationship with nature was a defining aspect of their spirituality. They didn't just worship in stone temples. They revered sacred groves, rivers, and hills. Natural features were imbued with spiritual significance, and rituals were often conducted under the open sky. It's a bit like having church in your favorite park every Sunday, but with more chanting and less organized seating. The Celts believed that the land itself was alive, a concept that modern environmentalists might find refreshingly ahead of its time. And then there's the fascinating concept of headhunting. Let's be honest, it sounds like something out of a horror flick, and it's been sensationalized to no end. But here's the scoop. The Celts did take the heads of their enemies, which they believed held the soul and power of the individual. This wasn't just gruesome trophy hunting. It was a spiritual practice, a way to harness the strength of their foes. Sure, it's a tad morbid by today's standards, but in a world where physical prowess and bravery were currency, it made a certain grim sense. The Celtic calendar was peppered with festivals that marked the changing seasons. Beltane, Samhain, Imbolc, and Lugnasad. These were not just excuses to party, but vital times for community bonding and spiritual renewal. Samhain, for instance, was the precursor to what we now call Halloween. It was a liminal time, where the veil between the living and the dead was thinnest, a chance to commune with ancestors and perhaps get a little spooky. Forget pumpkin spice lattes and plastic costumes. This was the real deal, with bonfires and maybe a ghost story or two that would make your hair stand on end. Economically, these rituals and ceremonies were vital to maintaining social cohesion. In a time when survival was never guaranteed, shared beliefs and communal practices provided a sense of stability and purpose. They reinforced alliances, established hierarchies, and ensured that everyone knew their role in the grand scheme of things. It was a bit like a medieval LinkedIn, but with more dancing around fires and less networking over coffee. Let's not forget the political dimension either. The Druids wielded significant influence, sometimes even over kings. They were the ultimate power brokers, mediating disputes, advising on matters of war and peace, and ensuring that the will of the gods was heeded. This wasn't just spiritual mumbo-jumbo. It was realpolitik wrapped in a cloak of sacred duty. And while their rituals might seem strange to us, they served a very practical purpose in maintaining order and cohesion in a society that was as complex as it was dynamic. In the end, the rituals and ceremonies of the Celts were a tapestry of belief and necessity, a blend of the mystical and the mundane. They may have raised eyebrows among their neighbors. They were an integral part of what made Celtic society tick. So as you sip your imaginary mead, ponder this. The Celts were more than their rituals, more than the sum of their legends. They were a people who lived in harmony with their world, who saw the divine in the everyday, and whose echoes still resonate in our modern celebrations. Hold that thought, because there's plenty more to uncover about these fascinating people, and trust me, the journey is just getting started. And speaking of resonating echoes, let's march straight into the battlefield of Celtic warfare, a place where the echoes were less about mystical chants and more about the clash of swords and the roar of battle cries. If you thought Celtic feasts were wild, just wait until you hear about their approach to warfare. Spoiler, it's not all about paint and pikes, as Hollywood might have you believe. First things first, let's talk about the infamous Celtic warrior. You've probably got this image in your head. A fierce, bare-chested figure with wild hair and a penchant for blue body paint, charging into battle without a care in the world. It's the kind of image that's been perpetuated by everyone from Roman scribes to modern filmmakers. But let's peel back the layers of woad and see what's really underneath. The Celts were indeed fierce warriors, but they weren't the reckless berserkers of legend. These were strategic fighters who understood the importance of intimidation. That blue paint, or woad, was less about fashion and more about psychological warfare. Imagine facing an army of warriors who look like they just stepped out of a fever dream. It's enough to give anyone second thoughts about battle. Now, when it comes to the cost of war, the Celts were no different from any other ancient society. Arming a warrior wasn't cheap. A quality sword could set you back the equivalent of a small fortune, and that's not even counting the cost of chariots, shields, and chainmail. Speaking of chainmail, did you know that the Celts were among the first to develop it? That's right. Long before it became the armor of choice for medieval knights, Celtic warriors were rocking chainmail shirts. Talk about trendsetters. But let's not get too carried away with romanticizing these warriors. The reality of Celtic warfare was brutal. Battles were bloody, chaotic affairs, where the goal was to break the enemy's will as much as their bodies. The Celts excelled at hit-and-run tactics, using their knowledge of the terrain to outmaneuver larger, more cumbersome armies. This wasn't just about brawn, it was about brains too. And let's not forget the sound of battle. The Celts didn't just charge silently into the fray. Oh no, they had a penchant for making as much noise as possible. Horns, drums, and battle cries were all part of the orchestra of war, designed to unnerve their foes. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of psychological warfare, with a side of bagpipes. Now, let's talk strategy. The Celts were adept at guerrilla tactics long before it became a buzzword in military circles. Their warriors were often lightly armored, allowing for speed and flexibility, which they used to great effect against more heavily armored foes. This wasn't the romanticized notion of the noble savage fighting with honor. It was pragmatic, ruthless, and effective. But here's the kicker. Despite their prowess, The Celts were often dismissed by their enemies as undisciplined and chaotic. The Romans, who had a vested interest in portraying themselves as superior, loved to paint the Celts as wild barbarians. Yet they were quick to adopt many Celtic innovations, from weaponry to tactics. It's the classic case of if you can't beat them, steal their ideas. Let's not gloss over the economic realities either. War was an expensive business, and Celtic chieftains had to balance the costs of arming their warriors with the economic demands of their tribes. Spoils of war were a significant incentive, but they also needed to ensure their people could survive when the fighting stopped. It was a tightrope walk between glory and practicality. The romantic image of the Celtic warrior charging into battle, sword aloft, is undeniably appealing, but the truth is far more complex. These were people who understood the harsh realities of war, who used every advantage at their disposal to protect their lands and their way of life. They were fierce, yes, but they were also smart, resourceful, and adaptable. So, as you ponder the legends of the Celtic warriors, remember that behind the myths lies a story of ingenuity and resilience. They weren't just fighting for glory or conquest. They were fighting for survival in a world that was as beautiful as it was unforgiving. And as we continue our journey through the rich tapestry of Celtic history, keep this in mind. These were a people who lived by their wits as much as their swords, who saw the world not just as a battlefield, but as a home worth defending. Stay tuned, because there's plenty more to uncover about the Celts, including the intricate web of alliances and rivalries that shaped their world. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Now, as we wander away from the clamor of Celtic warriors and their battlefield exploits, let's take a well-deserved detour through the quieter, yet no less fascinating, world of Celtic art and craftsmanship. If you've been imagining the Celts as nothing more than a bunch of rowdy warriors, well, my friend, you're in for a surprise as delightful as finding a mint-condition vinyl in your attic. These folks were not just about swinging swords and painting themselves blue. They were also master artisans who left behind a legacy of art that still manages to dazzle and baffle in equal measure. Let's start with the metalwork, the bling of the Celtic world. The Celts were the magpies of antiquity, drawn to shiny things with an almost unnatural fervor. They didn't just make jewelry and weapons. They created intricate masterpieces that were as much about flaunting status as they were about utility. Picture a Celtic torque, those neck rings that look like something a rock star would wear on stage. These weren't just accessories. They were symbols of power and prestige. The more elaborate the design, the higher your status. It's the ancient equivalent of rolling up to a party in a custom Lamborghini. And talk about skill. We're not just talking about bending a piece of metal here. Celtic metalwork involved complex techniques like repoussé, that's fancy talk for hammering from the reverse side, to create a design, filigree, and enameling. Imagine the patience required to create something as detailed as the Gundestrup cauldron, a silver masterpiece dating back to the 1st century BC, with its swirling designs of guards, warriors, and mythical beasts. Even today, archaeologists aren't entirely sure how they pulled it off. It's like trying to reverse engineer a smartphone with nothing but a hammer and good intentions. Now, about those stone carvings. The Celts loved a good standing stone, and not just for marking territory. These stones, often bearing intricate carvings of spirals, circles, and other geometric patterns, were more than just pretty faces. They were likely used for ritualistic purposes, serving as spiritual markers in a landscape that the Celts saw as a living entity. Each symbol carved into the stone was a thread in the tapestry of their mythology, an expression of their connection to the land and the divine. In today's world, these carvings are like ancient tweets, broadcasting messages of power, spirituality, and community across millennia. But let's not get swept away by the romance of it all. The economic reality was that crafting these pieces wasn't cheap. The materials required, gold, silver, bronze, had to be mined, traded, or plundered, and the time spent crafting them could have been used for more immediate needs like, growing food or defending against those pesky Romans. Yet, for the Celts, the investment was worth it. A finely crafted torque wasn't just a pretty bauble. It was a declaration of wealth and power, a tangible asset in a world where status could be as fleeting as the morning mist over the Irish hills. This brings us to the political aspect of Celtic art. You see, art wasn't just about personal expression or religious devotion. It was a tool of diplomacy and power. Gifting a lavishly adorned sword or a beautifully crafted brooch was a way to cement alliances and showcase the wealth and sophistication of one's tribe. It was the ancient version of gifting a Rolex or a Hermes scarf, with the added bonus of possibly warding off a war or two. Who knew art could be so practical? And speaking of practicality, let's not overlook the everyday items. The Celts were also masters at crafting utilitarian objects with an artistic flair. From intricately decorated pottery to the humble yet elegant fibulae, those fancy brooches that held their cloaks together, the Celts infused beauty into the mundane. It's a testament to their belief that art wasn't just for special occasions. It was a part of daily life, a reminder that even the simplest object could carry a touch of magic. But let's not get too carried away with the romanticism. While the Celts did create stunning art, they were also practical people who understood the value of their work in economic terms. Craftsmanship was a trade, and skilled artisans were highly valued members of society. Their work wasn't just about self-expression. It was a livelihood, a means to support their families and contribute to the community. And in a world where survival often hinged on the ability to adapt and innovate, the Celts excelled. So, as you marvel at the beauty and intricacy of Celtic art, remember that behind each piece lies a story of skill, status, and survival. These weren't just decorative objects. They were the currency of a society that valued both the practical and the profound. And as we continue our journey through the vibrant tapestry of Celtic culture, keep in mind that there's always more than meets the eye. The Celts may have been warriors, but they were also artists, visionaries who saw the world not just as a battleground, but as a canvas to be adorned. Stay tuned, because there's plenty more to uncover about these multifaceted people, and trust me, the saga is far from over. As we leave the kaleidoscope of Celtic art and craftsmanship behind, let's confront the elephant in the room, the enduring legacy of the Celts. It's a legacy wrapped in as much myth as fact, like a burrito where half the filling is imagination and the other half is historical reality. The Celts, those enigmatic figures who danced between the pages of history and legend, have left us with a tapestry as complex as it is colorful. But how exactly did we get from their world to ours, where their influence is both seen and unseen, celebrated and misunderstood? First, let's tackle the myth-making head-on. The image of the Celt has been romanticized more times than a Shakespearean sonnet. Think about it. How many times have you seen Celtic symbols slapped onto everything from tattoos to tea towels, each claiming to hold some mystical power or ancient wisdom? It's like the world's longest game of historical telephone, where the message gets more poetic and less accurate with each retelling. But strip away the misty-eyed nostalgia, and you'll find a society that was as pragmatic as it was poetic. Take the Celtic warrior, for instance. In popular culture, they're often portrayed as noble savages, living by a code of honor that wouldn't be out of place in a Hollywood blockbuster. Yet, history tells us they were also shrewd strategists and skilled negotiators. Their battles were as much about politics as they were about glory. It's a testament to their adaptability, a trait that's far less romantic but infinitely more interesting. And speaking of adaptability, let's not overlook the Celts' knack for cultural assimilation. They were the original cultural magpies, borrowing and adapting elements from the cultures they encountered. When the Romans came knocking, the Celts didn't just roll over. They absorbed Roman technologies and practices, blending them into their own culture with the finesse of a master chef, adding a secret ingredient to a signature dish. It's like having your cake and eating it too, with a side of Roman engineering. Economically, the Celts were no slouches either. They understood the power of trade long before global markets became a thing. Their networks stretched from Ireland to the Mediterranean, trading everything from tin to textiles. This wasn't just a case of swapping goods. It was about building relationships and securing influence. In a world where survival often hinged on alliances, the Celts were consummate diplomats, weaving a web of connections that would put a modern LinkedIn user to shame. But let's not sugarcoat it. The Celts weren't just merry traders and artists. They lived in a world where life was as fragile as it was vibrant. Their society was built on a delicate balance of power, where a bad harvest or a failed alliance could spell disaster. This precariousness is perhaps why their stories are filled with larger-than-life heroes and epic quests. In a world where certainty was a rare commodity, myth offered both an escape and a lesson. And what about those myths? The stories of Cuchulainn and Queen Medb, of sacred groves and enchanted cauldrons. They're as much a part of the Celtic legacy as their art and warfare. While they may not be entirely factual, they offer a window into how the Celts saw themselves and their place in the world. These tales are not just entertainment, they're cultural currency, passed down through generations as both a reminder and a warning. So why do these myths persist? Why do we cling to them like barnacles to a ship's hull? Perhaps it's because they offer us something we desperately crave, connection to a past that's both foreign and familiar. In a world where technology often outpaces understanding, the Celts provide a touchstone, a reminder of a time when life was simpler but no less profound. They speak to our desire for roots, for a history that's as much about narrative as it is about truth. But here's the kicker. The Celts are not just a relic of the past. Their influence is still felt today in ways both tangible and intangible. From the Gaelic languages spoken in pockets of Ireland and Scotland to the intricate knotwork designs that adorn everything from jewelry to architecture, the Celtic legacy is alive and well. It's a testament to their resilience and adaptability, qualities that have allowed their culture to endure where others have faded into obscurity. And let's not forget the modern fascination with all things Celtic. Whether it's the allure of a Celtic festival or the serenity of a druidic ceremony, there's something about the Celts that continues to captivate our imagination. Maybe it's the romance of a world where magic and reality coexisted, or perhaps it's the allure of a culture that celebrated both individuality and community. Whatever the reason, the Celts have carved out a niche in our collective consciousness that's as enduring as it is enigmatic. In the end, the story of the Celts is a tapestry woven from threads of fact and fiction, a blend of the real and the romanticized. It's a story that speaks to the complexity of human nature, to our capacity for both creation and destruction, for both myth and reality. As we wrap up our journey through the world of the Celts, remember that their legacy is not just a relic of the past, but a living, breathing part of our present. And in a world where the line between history and legend is often blurred, perhaps what matters most is not the truth of the story, but the truth it reveals about ourselves. So, the next time you find yourself sipping on a pint of Guinness or tracing the delicate lines of a Celtic knot, think of the Celts, not as distant figures shrouded in mist, but as fellow travelers on the road of history. Their story is our story, a reminder that the past is never truly gone, but lives on in the echoes of our actions and the stories we tell. Cheers to that, my friend.